All right. All good. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for coming out. So I'm Graden with Seedom. So Seedom is a decentralized app built on Ethereum that fundraises Ether for charity. Um, Typically, right now we're running every month. But the idea is we're really trying to incentivize routine giving on the blockchain because 60% of all the funds raised go directly to the nonprofit, and you can see that via the transaction. But then 30% goes to one lucky winner that participated in the fundraiser. So we use a random number generator to be able to pick that winner in a trustless way. Um, and yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and give a demo of it. So this is our basic UI. You can see already we've had about 4 people participate with 4 entries. And then you can see the amount raised and the different splits between the winner and the actual charity. In this case, we're doing our Seedom Charity Fund. In the past, actually, we've worked with several organizations. So Giveth was actually part of our beta. So we raised about 1 ETH when it was, 1 Ether was about $1,000 at the time. And then we've been working with a lot of grassroots organizations where 100% of the donations go directly to the efforts. So Grace Aid helps refugees, Donate for Refugees also helps refugees. And then Resilient Wellness is using blockchain to incentivize community health. So it's really simple to participate. All you have to do is come to the Seedom.io, make sure that you are logged into MetaMask, and have at least $2 worth of Ether in your account. And so this little red bar is actually the timer. So you can see we started this today, and it will end on the 25th. So we have a timer that will track how long the fundraiser is going, but then we also have a goal tracker, so we can really try to encourage people to help reach the goal for the charity. So all you really have to do, it's super simple. You just click here, play to win. You select the amount of entries that you want. So in this case, I'll just put 1 entry, and you can see that's about 0.01 ETH. And then this is where the random number generation comes in. So at the start of it, the charity will actually launch the fundraiser by entering a seed phrase. So that's a secret phrase that they won't tell anyone. And then Seedom enters our phrase that we don't tell the charity. And then the whole thing starts. And then every user enters a message. And then at the end, when we reveal our secret message, and when the charity reveals their secret message, Seedom will randomly pick a winner. And then at the end, you'll be able to see our message, the charity's message, and the message of the winner. So in this case, I'll just say, a badge here. So you can share this on social media. It automatically populates with your message, and then it tells everyone when the fundraiser is going to end. And actually, on the charity side, the way we do this is you would come to our GitHub lab. So if like you're acting as the charity to start it, you use terminal to enter the code that's in the GitHub lab, and then you will use copy some code, copy more code, and then you go to My Ether Wallet, and you'll actually submit this. So it is a little challenging if some charities aren't used to blockchain and MetaMask and My Ether Wallet and using all of this stuff. It can be tricky to onboard them. But if they're familiar with it, it's really easy to use. You just select the contract, you begin it, use MetaMask, and then when they end it, they would come back here and do an end function. So also, in the spirit of decentralization, we don't think that we should be the only ones involved in picking the next charity. So after you've participated, you can go to this voting section, And you can see we already have a vote for slave-free trade. They're actually they're using blockchain to eradicate modern-day slavery. So we're going to be launching with them later this week. So we're really excited for that. But let's say I want to see Giveth, awesome guys, be part of this again. So you have a voting mechanism. Same thing, you would have to set a small transaction to be able to cast your vote. And then when that goes through, you'll be able to see the amount of votes. So we're really trying to crowdsource, the selection of charities. So also I want to mention, you could even follow along on your phone because we are compatible with Trust Wallet, Cypher Browser, Coinbase Wallet, so you can participate. So there, the transaction just went through. So you can see we have an equal number of votes for these two awesome charities. And if you want to participate again, all you have to do is come back to the homepage, and it will automatically remember your secret message. Well, it's not really secret, but then you can come here and get more entries. So let's say I want to get another one because I want to increase my chances of actually being selected through the random number generator. Select more entries, confirm that transaction, and then it will take a little while. And as it's waiting, this is where we'll share a video about the charity so that people can actually get educated. Because it's not just about raising Ether, it's also about raising awareness for the charity. And what's really great is after a charity has worked with us, they'll be set up to be able to accept donations in Ether on an ongoing basis. Yeah. So that is Seedom in a nutshell. Does anyone have any questions that I could answer?
So I'm wondering what kind of charities have expressed interest in working with you guys?
So most of the charities that we are in contact with are like really small grassroots charities. So they're looking for new innovative ways to fundraise. So they find us by searching blockchain and looking into crypto. Mostly we've worked with organizations based in Europe. It's a little challenging to get US-based organizations to participate. And again, it's very like grassroots organizations, so they don't pay there's like no paid staff, and so 100% of the donations are going there. But really it's driven by the individuals in that charity that are like looking for new ways to fundraise and willing to experiment in this space. Do you have any other questions?
We'll have a round after this where we'll circle up and we'll do more questions too, for sure. Hey, dude, thank you, Kile. Yeah, ooh, thank you. Making it so easy for me. So we only have 2 blockchain for good demos. Seedom, which is awesome, who they were generous enough to actually put us in one of their rounds, and it was really fun. It was really cool. And then I'm going to just demo Giveth really quick. And Giveth is a community focused on blockchain for good. So we have lots of projects going on, but our main one is the DApp itself, right? The Giveth DApp. It's kind of like Bitcoin, where there's the Bitcoin network and the Bitcoin currency. We did the same stupid thing, and we named our DApp Giveth. Oops, But these are all, most of these projects that are on here are actually all different Giveth projects too, because we're trying to beta test our DApp by using it ourselves. And you can see there's actually a lot of people that are using our DApp right now. And the goal of the DApp is to bring transparency to nonprofit organizations and also to allow people to start a blockchain-based entity without having to incorporate legally in any way. They can have full transparency without actually a legal entity, and they can pay their people and they can do all these things. So it's pretty simple. We have this is the campaign page. We also have communities, right? So you can start a community. Right now we're in closed beta, so you can't start a community because we have a lot of UI bugs that we're still working through. But we're starting to onboard nonprofits right now. And so you can start a community like the Oregon DAC, or this is a community started actually at EdCon for open source block explorers. And when someone donates to a community, they still have control of their funds, but a delegate, which right now a delegate is just one person, but it's an Ethereum address, so later it can be a DAO, and that's what we're working with Aragon for. The delegate can then decide where to send their money, right? So you donate to Giveth, right? And then what you'll get right now I'm the delegate for Giveth, so when I say, oh yeah, I think it'll be really good in our governance campaign, right? You'll get an email that says, hey, your money's being moved to the governance campaign, right? So this is a little description, right? And here's the governance campaign. And if you say, well, like you'll get a link to this and you'll be like, what is this, holacracy, liquid democracy? I'm just not into that stuff, you know? You can veto and you can say, I don't want my donation to go there. But if you don't say anything for 3 days, then it will go there. So you lose control of it, right? But you still get the traceability. So it goes to that campaign, and then it can be actually paid out. So maybe, you know, we have our Berlin Airbnb that we just paid. It was $3,000. Here's the receipt, right? And maybe somebody's milestone maybe someone's donation will go to pay this off, and they'll get another email that says, hey, this is where your money went, with a link to this, and they can see, oh yeah, here's exactly where my money went. It went to Yaler. You know, and here's the receipt. Okay, that's what it did. And so you get this complete traceability to whatever granularity the campaigns would like. But let's say that Giveth goes rogue, you know, and it's like I just decide to take over and like start buying drugs and hookers and shit like that. Well, my campaign will actually get canceled because there's a reviewer, and the money that hasn't been spent on hookers will go back to the people who actually donated it in the first place. So there's, with this opportunity, like if someone tries to start an orphanage, they raise $500,000, but then they can't get the permit for the orphanage, the money would go back to the donors who actually sent it there so that it can be reallocated to other projects, right? Yeah, so that's how Giveth works. I can show like the creation of a milestone. It's pretty easy. Oh, look at Jordy. Hi, Jordy. But you have to be signed in. So when you if you go to beta.giveth.io, you can like sign in or sign up, and we'll just like do this. It's pretty easy. We actually run on Rinkeby, but it's bridged to mainnet. So this is kind of interesting where you donate Ether, and it goes into a bridge contract, and then we create a token on Rinkeby, and we do all of our transactions on Rinkeby where it's free, and then we, when the money actually gets paid out, we send a message to the bridge on mainnet, and it sends out real Ether. And eventually, we want to, now that there's an open source block explorer, we want to start a POA network or some kind of sidechain that's not Rinkeby, so that we can move to that. But we figure while we're still playing with it, Rinkeby has Etherscan, and we really needed an open source block. We need a block explorer to do our testing. So that's why we went with Rinkeby. But yeah, so here, this is Kile. So, and you know, you can put in an email so you can get all those alerts. You know. Let's see. No, it's Kile. Dude, you don't know Kile? Come on. It's a common name. And you could add a picture and all this other stuff, but we'll just do it. And so this is actually sending a transaction on the Rinkeby testnet, right? But we're using it in production. And then now he should be able to. Oh yeah, and like we have complete transparency, so you can see who actually sent the donations to each campaign. But I wanted to show how easy it is to create a milestone. So let's see. Oh, not that one. These are all the different projects that we have going on. Scaling now, which is over. S Signals, which is actually now Telegraph. Actually, we're just now starting a podcast for the network, which will be fun. And so like if Kile wanted to make a podcast, he could go here and propose a milestone. Be like, I want to make a podcast, right? And pretty soon, actually, Deem, where's Deem? There he is. Deem actually just added this really cool feature where you can, right now it's just you can embed a video, but when you push that button, video pop-up will come up, so you can just push a button and actually record a video as your milestone, and then say, yeah, this is what I want to do. I want to start I want to do a podcast on this and that, and you know, I need like just probably $150 to like make it worth my time to do this, and blah blah blah, and then submit, and the whole milestone will just be a video. You don't have to type any shit out. Maybe you have to type out a title, but that's it. Yeah, and then you just you can choose different currencies, but of course we always do the payouts in Ether. And in about a month, we'll have tokens integrated. The goal is DevCon, but we'll see. You know, software is tough. Yeah.
When do you plan to go live, like public type of, like moving on from the beta?
You know, it's really, I don't know that we'll go live where it's like totally permissionless and open for anyone to do it for a while. Mostly because I don't want people to get excited and be like, oh, it's, you know, I can start my nonprofit and do Ether, and then like, how do I do Ether? Like, I'm just a regular nonprofit dude, you know, and we don't have the energy to do support for and show people how to use Ethereum. So we kind of want to make sure that somebody has a level of like understanding that that they can back up their wallet and not lose money. Because our goal is to help charities. And it's not necessarily helpful if we let someone just dive in and then they spend all their time trying to figure out how do we do crypto, you know? So it'll probably be like a year before it's just totally open, and we're kind of waiting for the rest of the world to catch up.
I guess for this like usability part, you can probably partner with other projects that are actually 100% focused on that, right?
Yeah, it's very likely that we'll have Coinbase plugins, and we'll have different things that can connect straight to bank accounts and all of these things. But, you know, first things first, we need to get the UI working in a real way, and we're probably going to do a big UX overhaul and just completely rewrite the UI once we have it working. And then, you know, this is not a race. We don't have a token that we're trying to pump. We don't have something like, there's no, the goal of Giveth is to create DAOs for charity. So we have this going, and now we're going to start using Aragon, like the Aragon interface to create DAOs and see how that interfaces with this. Then we're going to do a big UX overhaul, and eventually this might even just become an Aragon app. But for now, you know, it's really about experimentation and seeing what kind of decentralized organizations we want to play with. The one that I'm really excited about, actually, is this, I probably can't find it so quickly, but using a TCR, so like a token curated market. So we'll do like a token bonding curve, and then have a philanthropic investment. So people can send money to this contract, and the money stays in that contract, and they'll get tokens, but also a DAC, which is what we call our groups here, a decentralized altruistic community, will also get tokens. The tokens that the guy sends in will actually be locked for 6 months, but the tokens that go to this community will end up being able to be used. And anyone who has the tokens can then stake to decide which proposals should get passed, and they can delegate their stake. And it'll be really cool because the tokens will actually go up in value the more people that come in. So like it's kind of it's like a Ponzi scheme, right? But for charity. So like you send money in, and there's a token curve, and as more people put money in, then the price of the token goes higher. And so you can be like, oh, I want to, you know, help children in India, but I also want to make money, so I'll buy this token, and then I get to decide also how the free money that's given to this community is spent. So that's the idea.
Yeah, I want to know how you protect identities, privacy, especially of those who are asking for, let's go fund me with crypto, because if they have to reveal either the smart contract or their private or their public key, etc., you're giving, I would say, some attack vector for anyone who is able to read and see how someone in need, someone who is looking for money or for funding, for support, is you're making themselves vulnerable in this regard.
Well, we don't do any KYC or any kind of things. Everything's pseudonymous. I mean, I just created an identity here. I am not Keeley. I'm not, but he's Keeley. So I did do it on his computer though. So, but I could have put any name up there, and it's really just an Ethereum address. Of course, if you really care about privacy, you're going to need to know how to protect your privacy. Use some kind of mixer or ZK snarks eventually or whatever to get your ether without attaching it to your name. But then, I mean, honestly, we're not really. This discussion is happening later tonight. Transparency versus privacy. We're going to have a 90-minute talk on that. So you should definitely come by. But we're more on the transparency side, because this is nonprofits. So the nonprofits are held to a pretty high standard of transparency. We're not going to ask for any IDs, but that's how we do it. But yeah.
Exactly on that with the KYC. For people who are donating, depending on the countries you're coming from, either there's charitable donations, tax write-offs, whatever else have you. Without KYC, how does that happen?
So it's always optional, and if you're a nonprofit and you raise money here, you'll get to see exactly who sends the money, and it'll actually be really easy. It'll be really easy. Let's see. Here's probably one. It'll be really easy to kind of just send everybody an email with a tax receipt that show, oh, hey, the White Hat Group, if you want to get a tax deduction on this, then one button click, everyone gets their receipt for the year, and you can also have a little thing in the corner that says this is a registered nonprofit for tax deductions, and you can have that. It's of course an option, but we're really focused for now not on nonprofits. We're more on blockchain-based entities to make the scope small. But of course, we want people to be able to get tax write-offs.
You say you're not doing KYC. How do you, because that's a problem even for blockchain companies. They can't open bank accounts. When they get money given to them, banks won't open up a bank account. So are you going to do KYC, or is it just not done yet?
I mean, anyone can create a KYC platform for this, and we probably will, but that's not, I don't care if they can't open a bank account. Who needs a bank account? You have an Ethereum address. And that's kind of the direction I'm pushing. So, but of course, that's not necessarily everyone's opinion in my team. I'm a crazy anarchist. So, I say fuck the banks. But actually, the DApp team is creating this as a white label. And so if Amnesty International just wants to take this code and launch it and do their own things, then they can build on top of it. So, okay, we're going to move this to a discussion, though. So we're going to have a little practice discussion. So if everyone could stand up, I'm going to rearrange the chairs. Hey, Gregor. How's it going, buddy? So this is just a random roundtable discussion on blockchain for good and how we can enable blockchain to do good, right? So obviously, I talked about Giveth. Keeley talked about Seedom. Maybe you guys have other projects that you want to talk about. Does anyone have any topics that they want to discuss that I can just like note down? Yeah.
Yeah. Climate change.
Climate change. Okay. Anybody else have any topics? Fair data. Okay. Any other topics? Charity and investing. Okay. Those are pretty good. So, well, let's start with climate change.
Hey everyone, my name is Liam. I'm currently a blockchain and full stack engineer in Rotterdam. And I think blockchain's really cool, been in the space for a while. Currently we're doing like a decentralized energy grid project. I know it's been the big thing since peer-to-peer was the thing anyway, not even before blockchain. But I'm really interested in what we can do with blockchain and specifically like token economies in terms of governing value, having more economic leverage per person, to basically stir like decentralized action around climate change. I think it's obviously quite a big issue. The world is obviously quite on a different moral streak right now, on a different momentum, and I find it interesting that we could actually re-engineer sort of the whole, I guess, capitalist incentive mechanism to give people more power over, in their daily interactions, things that support / go against climate action. Don't know how this discussion works, but just going to put it out there.
So I guess the question then is, what metrics do we use to actually qualify what is change? Because we'll all have different opinions on that, and personally, I'm not sure about the science, but other people will have their own certainties. So how do we arrive at one metric that we all care about, or at least can give validity to?
I think that's a really good question. And I think in terms of metrics, obviously you give something a metric and suddenly people optimize for it. What I advocate is less an absolute metric and more a relative one. So in terms of saying, oh, we need to come up with something that represents, you know, the climate improving. We have that, sure, but I mean, maybe something better is just looking at it from a pragmatic perspective. What can we just have as a metric that relative to what we have now is better? Because right now we just have sort of, you know, we just have energy labels and like food packaging and stuff like that. What if you could walk through the supermarket? You can do this in Sweden. You can get an AR app and it shows you which products are vegan and which are not. What if, with the whole supply chain being transparent, with things being represented by, you know, very clear forms of tokens and affiliations, every economic purchase you make becomes a vote for or against, you know, something connected to the climate, for example.
Just a few brainstorms on putting an absolute measurement on climate change. This doesn't affect things like desertification or like failing agricultural yields. But for example, the Maldives and Bangladesh are feared to be underwater within a decade or a couple decades. So how about the water level in a place? Like if the water level in my street is zero, there's no water there, but if it rises because of floods and the water level stays there for a certain amount of time, that could be one absolute measurement. And speaking of what we just saw here, what if when we fund, for example, the something in the Maldives or something in Bangladesh, we could also use decentralized finance to multiply those yields, so that if there's a catastrophic flood in Bangladesh or in Maldives or wherever else I'm not thinking about now, measuring that water level, for instance, can also be a multiplier in a derivative that pays back to the people who are afflicted a huge multiple of what was raised. So if like the Bangladesh anti-cyclone fund reached $10,000 US in ETH, with decentralized finance, that kind of multiplier effect of 100 or 300, if that absolute measurement goes up higher. This is just a brainstorm. Anyone else want to add to that? Yeah.
How does that work there? Where does the... This is like a discussion.
TCR curve, I guess, kind of like Griff was talking ago a minute ago.
Like, how does value work in that scenario?
Well, and if the water's level has risen, are we too late to affect the change? Should it be more of a preventative approach, or just measuring what's happening currently?
Yeah, we got to use the mic, but it's just like 10. Yeah. Oh, it's a talking stick.
Do you want to repeat that?
Sure. I just think as industry as a whole, I would like to see preventative measures, actionable measures taken. So once water levels have risen, like you said, we're not so far behind the ball that we're trying to just compensate for problems people are going through, but really trying to interact with the future problems and change them, if that makes any sense.
I think some component of this is that that's kind of like she mentioned, paying the externalities after the problems caused by the externalities happen, whereas our current system, basically the issue is that we're not taking into account the externalities and the external costs of our actions, which means we have to find some way to price that in without making basically a tax, or we have to find a system for paying these costs beforehand so that they don't become an issue.
But most people around the world are really stubborn. They don't see the risk. Maybe in this closed circle, or in maybe a circle that's maybe numbering 50,000 people worldwide, we can extrapolate using our brains and using the science, but most people can't, and most people need to be dramatically shocked.
Yeah, I mean, I'd hesitate against the word stubborn. I think it's more like, empathetically speaking, it's like, at least for me, this is just my belief, but we're aware of it because we've got the nice growing up, the nice background, and it's more the sense that this is where money comes in and where money is great, because what money enables us is it's a mechanism to make people care about things accidentally. So it makes them we all care about buying beer and bread. Not necessarily everyone cares about monetary policy or inflation or why that's happening, although those things can still coexist, and align the incentives of the group.
I just wanted to go back to your thought a minute ago that was about how do you get the multiplier effect, because I'm largely in your camp that we're too short-sighted to foresee every disaster. Where it comes from we don't know. So when the proverbial shit hits the fan, we need a multiplier effect on the resources that we have to create reparations. The mechanism of that I'm not sure, but again it comes back to kind of potentially another bonding curve that can create scarcity with the token supply as you go, pegged to some kind of, like a friend of mine, she's doing the World Replenish Index, so pegged to a number or a metric like that. I don't really know the full metric, but a workable metric is the idea. So if you can peg the multiplier effect to the metric that shows, as you were saying, then I think that's a great idea, but that's just an opinion.
Yeah, how does that work?
I was going to say maybe the answer is in TCRs, as Griff mentioned earlier, or bonded curves, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, what you're describing is an insurance policy, and
a dynamic insurance policy that changes, and the TCR can measure our confidence that something is the case or not the case. So if we proverbial we are all confident that this is going to happen, maybe we would stake a huge amount. It's a matter of life and death, a matter of survival of the planet, survival of our species as it is now. So maybe just the financial power of 50,000 people could, at this level of confidence, could reach the not caring of a billion people, or a billion people who are interested in beer, burgers, and whatever. Yeah.
So if we know that in 30 years, like how many millions of people will be underwater in Bangladesh? How many? 150. So then the time is now probably to start building some homes that are not in that region, right? So it shouldn't be like in 20 years some emergency fund or something. It should be now slowly tomorrow, moving 100 people out of this region and then educate them all. Then maybe better more money over 30 years than a lot of emergency money in the last 5 years. I don't know how.
Yeah, you were mentioning earlier how what money does is it lets us care about things that we don't really care about. So why don't we make a money that cares about these issues and preempt the problem as opposed to wait for the problem to happen and then yeah, I mean, or like
this is like Freeman Dyson can tell you nobody knows if these models even work because he was there when the guy invented the weather models, and we don't know if it will happen, how fast probably will, but it's impossible to really predict. So yeah, maybe if people start moving out now, maybe it's not even necessary if this will be prevented. Maybe it will be prevented, so it's a hard problem.
So, and this reminds me of a discussion I had with a friend a while ago. And he was basically speaking about this radical thing that we would tokenize natural assets like air, water, forests, etc. And if we would combine it with something like TCR or just bonded curves, it would basically mean, you know, like the more the country is polluted, the more the prices of water, air, and other resources go up. And basically whoever actually lives in that country, that it's a resident, so because that person is also breathing that air, they would get like those tokens allocated. And in this way, maybe this could somehow work, you know, to incentivize the companies to be more ecological, because they would need to buy those tokens for their production. So the more polluted, the bigger the costs. I don't know. Next.
I mean, I don't know. I have a different perspective. Like, how about the education? For example, I come from development country. I come from Indonesia. So it's like a lot of people there. I mean, I've been living in Europe, and I saw like how the society work in here. Like, they do recycle and all that stuff. And then the plastic, they know how to throw it and how to recycle. And then in my country, we don't really like have this knowledge, you know, like how to do recycle and how to do things to prevent the climate change. So I don't know, I was thinking like how about all the foundations like this kind of blockchain and stuff, not only just focus on the climate change, but the climate change is like about the people also. So the people, if they don't know what is exactly the climate change and what is the thing that affect of the climate change, I don't know, like maybe we could start from something simple like with the people and the education. That's what my point of view. Indonesia.
I was just going to agree with you. Yeah, it does. It comes back to just what the metric is and how we agree on what that metric is. Again, over and over. It's a problem, I think.
Well, so this was a nice round. There was another topic I don't know that we've got to. Did we talk about fair data yet? No? You want to go for it?
Okay, so I come from a project called Data Fund, and we've been working a lot and thinking a lot about how ethical data exchange should be, how a sustainable data economy of the future should look like. And it was always also very difficult to explain to the mainstream people what we are about. So in this sense, we kind of came up with the concept of fair data, which is in a sense, in a very loose sense, the digital equivalent of fair trade. So, and if I tell you that Facebook is not fair data, you know, it immediately clicks. And it goes even further. The thing is, so this is something also that we are now working on. It's trying to establish fair data principles that should be designed from the community by the people. So here come also TCRs and curation markets into the game. But also the reason why it's in a sense, you know, what we are not speaking today a lot about is that, for example, me and my phone, when I use my phone, from the cognitive science perspective, we form one cognitive system. My phone is my extended mind. And it's a little bit an abstract notion, but still, if my phone is part of me, it's my extended mind, then personal data is also, it's me. And here comes then the question, you know, when there's a lot of talk, who should own personal data? I mean, we don't speak about who should own me or who should own you, you know. So in this sense, it's like once we recognize that personal data is us, then actually the question of ownage is also becomes questionable in a sense that we are actually speaking about slavery, about a form of data slavery. So in this sense, why we find this then important, Fair Data Society is the non-profit track of Data Fund, is that we are actually today standing on the crossroads. You know, do we go in the direction that's been charted now, where we are actually already in data slavery and it's getting worse, or should we either go in the direction where we are in control of ourselves, of our personal data? We have the rights. We are also fairly compensated when it comes down to this, and this is what we call fair data society. So that's kind of the idea in a nutshell.
But it's a really complicated problem because there's my data and our data. And so if we do some sort of thing together, some sort of sporting activity or whatever, whose data is that? Right. So and maybe I'm okay with someone taking my data, and maybe you're not. And so these are actually quite difficult. You know, it isn't a simple problem. It's actually quite a complex problem.
It's a different paradigm. So we're talking about data from an ACL paradigm in that respect. If we think about it in capabilities, you get to grant connectivity in the ways that you please to whoever you want. So it's the fact that we've built everything backwards that has caused this. So I think we're probably in the turnaround now with DID being a pairwise connection. You both share your data when you have a conversation. Who owns that? Well, neither of you own it, but you share it together. And if you give the capability to somebody else to join that conversation, well, it's the three of your data. But it's the paradigm of the bouncer at the door rather than the bearer token. That's just my opinion again now. But
I don't know the answer to this question I'm going to ask, but is it a losing battle? Is it analogous to, for example, carbon dioxide that I'm breathing out? We're all breathing out carbon dioxide now, and that belongs to the world, and that enters the atmosphere and everyone can use that. But at the same time, I'm also breathing out a lot of clues about myself, health issues, what I ate, what my mood is, maybe how I had sex, things like that. And is it a losing battle? Because one day that carbon dioxide that I breathe out has DNA markers that identify me, and I simply have no control over that. I cannot exert control over the air that I'm breathing here, and when I go home, the air that I'm breathing out there. So is it possibly a losing battle? And therefore, should we just focus on all data should be open source. All data should be allowed to be used, and it's actually the standards that are the issue. No.
So, in my opinion, it's like why we are making also this, in a way, really kind of meta physical view. You know, it's not a losing battle. It would be like if we, like the slaves in the 18th century. You know, when they were wondering about slavery, you know, how to get rid of. They probably also, some of them at least, didn't ask themselves if it's a losing battle. So it's a lot of these changes are actually that need to happen, are going to happen on the sociological level. First, we need to recognize the situation we're in. So, you know, slavery today in the most of parts of the world is unacceptable. So also, at least most people avoid it. Slavery is still present. So, and in this sense also, I think if we just recognize how we are being treated now in the digital domain, and this becomes unacceptable, a lot of things will already change. But it's not going to be like, it's not 0 or 1, it's somewhere in between. So it's these questions. Then when you mentioned like our data, it's, yeah, it's excellent point, and we've been thinking about this. So with some data that can be labeled as my data, it's quite easy. It gets complicated, yeah. Like we make a photo now, and it's all of us on the photo. Whose data is it, you know?
It was like the comment earlier, put an orange sticker on your name tag if you don't want a picture taken of you. Okay, how does that work, right? So one of us has an orange sticker, and someone takes, you know, he's got a camera over there that's videotaping this session. So is someone going afterwards and fuzzing out that face with the orange sticker?
Yeah, but it's, you know, it's like, okay, this is pure speculation, but I think if we would somehow start acting to behave in the digital world and apply same logic as we do in the physical, a lot of things would already change in a natural way. So it's, you know, when we speak technically, we speak about ZK snarks. I think ZK snarks enable a lot of new interactions regarding the data, where it's more like they can create a dialogue like we're speaking now, where it's for me physically impossible to share everything that's going on in my brain, you know. But in the digital, we actually do that. We just share like our whole hard drives, you know. We are not providing the answer. So it's recognizing these things, and then also, yes, when we speak about our data, then we can speak about how does our data work for the common good, you know. And we can speak about co-ops and maybe structures upon the structures of my data going towards our data and so forth, you know. So I think first we just need to recognize that the way how internet is built now is wrong. Yeah.
So I think if we think about like the prioritization of fair data, maybe in like a peer-to-peer interaction, it's not as important. Maybe you just set up standards of like agreeing to capture that data, and if you do capture it, like agreeing upon ways how to use it. I think a more important relationship between data is like business and consumer, because we're seeing a lot of businesses like getting hacked, like Facebook. A lot of businesses like emails getting read, I heard, on like Gmail. And so if you can figure out a way to kind of flip the script on that business to consumer relationship, because businesses, they have a vast amount of data which they have to then store and then use appropriately and then keep up to date. But if you instead figure out a way to have the user retain ownership of their personally identifiable data, and be able to give permission to businesses to be able to communicate with them via those avenues, let's say mailing address, email, phone number, but then allow the business, who's also creating data based off of that consumer's use, be able to figure out how to measure and analyze the data, but anonymized to that person. So it's like they know that, consumer XYZ bought this, purchased this, viewed the website here, but it can never be tied back to that person. But they can still facilitate personalized ads or messages to that person because they have permission to email that person. So if you could use blockchain to facilitate that anonymization. So if you start there with the business to consumer, because businesses are going to have the most amount of data, and then shift into figuring out how, person to person, like if you give me your phone number to call you, or if we can, figure out a way to facilitate a phone call without me needing to get your data. Because once I have it, then I kind of, you're just trusting me not to abuse it. Like even just like going to an email newsletter, I could put anyone's email address. There's no verification method that I own that data.
So one really interesting thing when I was looking more into slavery. The thing is, why did slavery arise? Because at that point, it presented the most efficient business model. So it was all about efficiency in business. And also, why did slavery get abolished? Was because with employment we actually have more efficient systems. And I see that David is not completely disagreeing with me, and I'm just passing the stick because I want to hear the other side.
Okay, slavery, first of all, has been around as long as man has existed. Right, and it's still around today. Slavery from the 19th century in the context of the North American dimension is absolutely that. Slavery was used throughout time, whether it was even going back as the 15 or 1600s here, most of the Ottoman Empire. Anybody who used galleys as ships, they used slaves to power those ships. Slavery goes back to the Roman Empire. You had generally an option of you were either killed or you became a slave. It was literally that a defeated army would become or a defeated region. Those were the options: death or slavery. So we have a particular context. I'm not defending slavery, first off, okay, but we have a particular context of slavery in the context of the 17th, 18th, or 18th, 19th century. It has a long, long history, and it has a very different dimension, but it isn't only the economic of more of a history point.
Yeah, very true. When I was referring to it, I meant chattel slavery in the 19th century. But yeah, it was like back in Egyptian times. So there were like different nuances and actually also different rules. So yeah, very true. Thank you for pointing that out.
However, I think your point is still valid regardless of the frame you're looking at it through. It was the economical incentive. It was a better business model than employing people before there was an economy to employ people through. So your point still stands.
Kind of derailing back to the topic of conversation. If that applies to human capital, right? If employment and employment through an economy is more efficient than slavery, is there an analog in the data world where if we treat data ethically, we'll be more productive rather than less productive? Is there something? Is that something that's?
Yeah, this was actually what I wanted to say, but then got a little bit mind wandered. In my opinion, I don't have any proofs right now, but we are also working on this, trying to figure out. It's basically a fair data economy is more effective for everybody. So even the companies that will recognize that by giving back the data to individuals, enabling them to have control, supporting free flow of data, data portability, and so forth, will actually have more viable business models than companies that don't do this.
This reminds me of something from Jordan Greenhalgh's, I think it's his name, about complex systems and step functions. So at the moment it's better if everybody who doesn't share the data has benefits, but only if everybody all at once would flip, then it would be better. But it's impossible to achieve this in stages because nobody will go first. So maybe you need or we need some D-Day, 1st of August 2030. Everybody flips.
Yeah. What was it? Like open sharing of data or portable data. That's what you said. That is a tangible like benefit. Like if a user has control of their data and they can use it in all their services, that's like a UX benefit for everybody, right?
Who doesn't share the data has benefits, but only if everybody.
Yeah, I mean, this is the point why we are also working with protocols in blockchain. You know, it's like for me to use your DApp, I don't need to ask you permission. The user needs to come to my DApp, and basically that's it. And I mean, here I guess we all understand the benefits of it, but the world outside doesn't yet.
What was it?
I think that's the problem, you know, like it's just like small amount of people know about this blockchain and all the private data. It's important, you know, because like out there, like a lot of people doesn't know about this. What they think about Bitcoin, Ethereum, it's just about money, you know, like make money faster in 3 times in 2 minutes. This is what people think about this world. I mean, honestly, I came here as a commoner. I'm not really in a blockchain business, you know. So what I'm thinking, like out there is thousands of people doesn't really care about information, data, private. I mean, for them, because they really enjoy all the services like Facebook and all that stuff, you know. So I think the difficult part is how to communicate this important matter. That's what I think. Like, and I think it's one of the duty of blockchain.
So yeah, this is also something that we discovered. You know, one of the things that we work and we're going to have a demo one day before DevCon. It's one mini summit. Is a relatively simple DApp. It's the beginning. It's just decentralized file transfer. So like WeTransfer.com, but sending files over Swarm and in an encrypted way. And that's a good question. The working name is Fairdrop, but somebody snitched the ENS domain, so we are now kind of frantically looking for a different name. But like you said, you know, it's I don't believe, you know, with our DApp that unless a lot of effort we've put in and are still putting into the UX. Because it's like, I don't believe that just the specs that you can send it over Swarm and that nobody sees and that it's privacy and encrypted, that it's going to matter for the average user. So the experience of your DApp needs to be on par with the centralized solutions, and then on top of that, you add extra benefits like privacy, decentralization, and for that we are still quite far away, because blockchain itself does give some constraints, you know. At the same time, I think, you know, it's like I don't see that the change is going to happen like from 0 to 1 in a sense for Facebook. I see Facebook as the new smoking. And you know, it's like sooner or later everybody will know that it's bad for your mental health, but some will still ignore the warnings like this can make you really depressed or something, you know. And the other thing, that inspiration that I kind of see is actually where I draw some parallels is veganism. So it's in a way, you know, what I mean with here is, and I'm not a vegan, you know, I'm not, so I'm kind of vegetarian. I'm vegetarian, I guess. But it's like how we see how the ideas evolve. You know, veganism today is one of the most growing ideas. So in a sense, privacy, control over your data and things like that, I think this is also going to be a similar process where more and more people take control of their digital life and hopefully also inspire others.
Here, taking control of your files and data, I can explain my approach in 1 minute, because I think this is the only way, at least for me. it's like gold. You don't really have it if it's not in your house, like in the mathematical sense. So data, if it's not on your server, maybe in your house, and it doesn't live there, out of there, then it's out there. You cannot expect not to be used. You cannot mathematically. But if you take care of your own data under your control, then you get a set of problems which you don't have if you let somebody else take care of this. For example, backups, availability, and stuff. But I'm solving and successfully iterating for my own use. But I'm aware that it's not for like non-programmers or taxi drivers. They won't do this. But I still wonder if there is some way for them also to, because for example Raspberry Pis, cheap computers, everybody with good user interface, maybe everybody can buy one, at least have some of their basic stuff, but you sooner or later you run into problems. For example, your photo library, it's a big problem. I won't save it to Google or anywhere, and I don't have it solved for our family purposes yet, but I will solve it. But
have you heard of DAppNode? Yeah, so that I think that's the personal server option with the nice UX, and you can have one person in the family that shares it with everybody else. So then you know who has your server, and it may be not you. You know, your grandma is not going to have her own server, right? But maybe you're kind of a tech savvy guy. You can have a server for all of your friends and family. So I want to move to the last topic, just so there's time. But yeah, okay, and also introduce investment versus charity.
So you were just 1 second too fast for me, because I wanted to say DAppNode, and the other thing which is, and big kudos to Giveth for this, and the other thing that I wanted to say is a big important part is the ident3. It's also released, because this is when I said also before that interaction becomes more human-like. So I have my data on the DAppNode, and I just give like need to know only answers through the ident3, you know. So I wanted only to mention this one.
You can promote my projects all you want. It's totally cool. Okay, so the next one, though, the last topic is investment versus charity, and you brought up the topic, so maybe you can introduce it.
So I've noticed kind of like, at least in the way that Giveth is doing charity, quote unquote, it's in many ways it's very similar to, say, angel investing or just early investment rounds in general, where you are giving resources in exchange for the accomplishment of goals, right? So where does the line between giving for good go to giving for yourself, and should you draw that line? Do we want to draw that line?
I think charity will always be investment, because if you're investing into something, you're investing into the good for your future, your children's future, etc. So I think that line will always get crossed with charities regardless, but whether it's the good or evil type of investment, I think is maybe the questions to go talk. No? Okay, well, I still think it get crossed either way.
And there's something else to be said about the intention on return. Like, you're investing in something, but the expected return, if it's somewhat, depending on how you answer that question, I feel like puts you in one camp over the other.
So there's this notion of impact investing, and you have impact funds that is probably somewhere in the middle, where investments are considered not just for the return they bring, but also for the impact they do, and maybe this goes a little bit along the lines.
I think there's also like another interesting middle ground where it's like the Kickstarter model. So in the charity, there's no expectation of return. In an investment, you expect a return on your investment. But the Kickstarter model is that like, I just want to invest to a project and I'm going to get what I said that I'm going to get. So there's a few middle grounds, and I think that's where becomes interesting.
And do you want to facilitate that with Giveth or other?
So I mean, Giveth's just really a application for transparency. And if people wanted to create a token and say every time that money goes here, you know, the token goes up in value or whatever, that can be built on top of it. But it's not like a core piece. Really, it's just like donations come in and they're tracked. And maybe there's like someone gets a T-shirt every time that their money gets spent. You know, to give us your address. You can do all of these lines, and it's very extensible as an application. But it's not necessarily telling people how to do it one way or another, you know? And in the end, that's the experiment. Like, how obviously the charity system is a little sketch right now, or, you know, it definitely has a low public opinion. And we have this opportunity in the blockchain space to build new systems, new incentive systems, and new ways for people to interact with each other, right? In a decentralized way. And so that's what Giveth is trying to enable people to try the whole spectrum if they want, right? There's the TCR model where we're going to create a shit coin, but it's doing good work, right? Or there's just like what we're doing now, which is donate money and you'll get nothing other than those happy feelings that you're supporting a project that you really want to support, and you see where the money goes, right? So, you know, it's an open model, and there's a lot of experimentation to do.
I think it's useful to define those two words, investment versus charity. And I'm thinking that charity is investment in everything, in the greater community, up to planet Earth, or maybe beyond, with the idea that there's been some injustices, some imbalances caused by either nation-state players, or also injustices or imbalances of nature. Where I was born, the country that the country that I grew up in, maybe created an imbalance vis-a-vis someone else living in a different country. Therefore, it's my duty to correct that. It's my duty to be charitable so that imbalance is actually corrected. When I want to invest not the whole world that I'm thinking about, it's my stomach, myself, my family. Maybe that's where it extends to. Maybe a little bit my initial community. That's what multiplying leads to. So I think those two definitions are important to think about. And then I think what Giveth, the magnificent opportunity that Giveth offers is maybe we can mix those. As you were saying, you know, maybe I can be a little bit 20% selfish and 80% charitable, and maybe I can have a high resolution dynamic resolution where I change that, or where we all change that.
Yeah, and I can just say there is that kind of experimentation going on. Like for DAppNode, DAppNode eventually will be a sustainable nonprofit organization. Hopefully, even get DAO-ified one day, right? And Jordy and I put in a bunch of seed funding, but we actually hope to get that Ether back eventually, right? And then but we used Giveth to do the accounting, and so we can see how much Ether we're owed back, and now we're starting to get some back, which is cool, right? But like Tenegraph, we fund Tenegraph without any expectations of a return or any deal like that, you know. And yeah. So yeah, you can do whatever you want. The nice thing is you can plug and play because it's a blockchain.
I think another important thing to bring up is it about motivation, or is it about result, or is it a combination of both? And so like the Seedom model is, yes, it's a charitable cause because you're giving to a nonprofit, but it's also somewhat of an investment because you have that chance to win. And so no matter what your motivation is, it's the same for everyone. But the result is either you win and you get 30%, or you just have that happy feeling of you've given to charity. But I do think like charity is an investment, but not all investments are charity.
And I also think it's really nice. Historically, we have this kind of binary version of looking at for-profit and non-profit. And I think the reason that is because we haven't had the ability to have the level of transparency necessary to blur the lines. Because if it's sort of one thing and sort of another thing, unless you trust that what is really happening is what they say is happening, then you have to kind of push yourself too far one way or too far the other way to make sure you're fitting in like the mold that was established for nonprofit or for profit.
I was going to say pretty much the same thing.
I like the example where you had the expectation that you're going to get the money that you invested return, and the expectation where, I'm just giving this charity. What about like the middle ground where you've done a project and it actually can only return half of it or 50% back? This kind of an interesting case. It doesn't really have to be this binary. Yeah, so sometimes a project will be able to do everything you can do with half the money. You can get half of it back, or I don't know. Just gonna what the stuff that you're working on.
I mean, that's the nice thing. All these things are totally possible to be even just automated, right? If people want to do it. But also, I don't think that there's anything wrong with making money off a charity. I mean, I don't do it, but that doesn't mean that people shouldn't. There's a lot of impact investment going on, and unfortunately, we do live in this system of money where, that's what it's kind of like fish in water. We almost forget that it's around until you go to Burning Man, where it's disappeared for a week. Then you realize that you're swimming in money, right? And if that's what gets people going, if that's what the incentive model of the day is, I don't think that it should be wrong that we get people involved in finding a way to make the water cleaner, and the people that do it and invest in it actually make some money. I don't think that's dirty. It feels tainted because money is evil and it sucks and we need to fix it. That's a different topic, but it should be okay.
I was just going to say it's almost a double whammy. Like, it's extra because you're getting people motivated by what they want, which is the money, to do good things, even better.
Yeah, I was gonna say basically the same thing. It's more like sustainable charity, right? If you can make incentives on the side of the charity as well as incentives on the side of the charitor, then it can be more sustainable in both ways.
I mean, depending on the charity you're talking about, I mean, most of them don't make money, right? Almost all, the nonprofits are not for nonprofit versus not for profit. Whether you're a small medical group that's helping children with, very serious diseases, or responding into some sort of a SARS or an Ebola outbreak, there's not really a money-making motive. So I think your comment earlier about people not understanding about the whole blockchain and people generally being afraid of blockchain, you have a good opportunity. This is a great opportunity. The people who don't understand it tend to have a lot of the money right now because they tend to be free income tends to come with age, usually. But you're a unique opportunity here to create a system of really opening up this whole space, which otherwise isn't there. But I think I don't know, maybe you said about the UX or the user experience is really the key. Right now, it's terrible. I mean, there is nobody else other than the community that's here that's going to actually probably be giving on the Giveth platform, because no one else will know how the hell to do it, right?
Yeah, and we won't expect it to be. I mean, it's an experimentation and it's a 10-year plan at least, And I think that there's a lot of movement over here in the UX side of things, that we're building meta transactions and other cool techniques that will make things easy. And we just got to forget that it's blockchain, and just no, it's not. It's whatever the application is doing.
Blockchain is plumbing. How many people open their walls and look at the pipes in their house? How exciting are the pipes to look at your? It's plumbing. That's reality. It's all plumbing, right?
So I'm just here, kind of a little bit brainstorming. I'm personally not sure if we are capable at the moment of, let's say, true impact investing, because when we look at the money from the investment perspective or basically earning, it's like I remember the first lesson I had at the economics college was like the purpose of the company is to grow. So that was like the first lesson. It kept being repeated throughout the years. So, and before I mentioned with Data Fund that we have the non-profit Fair Data Society track and the for-profit one. And in a sense, you know, when I work on Fair Data Society, it's like, yes, I don't need to think about the bottom line. I'm just here to think about how we can make things better. And this is what I also love with Giveth. You know, I think Giveth is actually, in a way, giving the possibilities that people can create and express themselves without thinking about the existential things, you know, like how am I going to pay for this? How am I going to, you know, like buy some food? I'm just here to do it, you know. So until I think we will be able to speak for impact investing in a more pure sense once there's no existential need for the people. You know, because it's easy to just give money around if you have millions, you know. But the guy in Africa who doesn't know how to buy food for his kids for tomorrow has totally different perception of money, you know.
But I mean, if we're talking blockchain for good, we got to really look at it. One of the major use cases of blockchain is creating money. And if you look at the banks, right, and the fiat system and how that money is created, it's actually incentivizing by default banks to loan money. And that's like a charitable act almost, right? And that money is created out of nothing to inspire banks to support the economy and support small businesses to get loans, right? Well, with this technology, we can create money that supports and incentivizes something else, right? In Bitcoin, it's supporting the Bitcoin network and guessing a random number. Now, unfortunately, 99.999% of the effort is guessing a random number at this point, and a little bit of supporting the network. But there are other cool blockchains that are doing other things, like folding coin, right? Like Cure Coin. They actually do proof of folding proteins. So there's some guys in Stanford that are using this distributed network of computers that are mining a coin, and they get this coin when they work on folding proteins for their research, right? And if we can do something like that for cleaning, I mean, it's very difficult. It's a lot easier to stay in the digital realm, right? But eventually, we can get to a space where maybe if you clean up these beaches, you will get these tokens, and then, you know, the currency itself actually incentivizes people to clean beaches, right? Or to, you know, build orphanages, right? Yeah, grow forests, protect trees. And if we can start creating systems like that, then you won't even think about, you won't have to think, where am I going to get the money to plant trees? Because there is a system in place where money is created for planting trees. And that's the direction I want to see blockchain for good go. We'll see if we can get there, because it's a huge leap. But that's why I'm really excited about this curation market model, where we create some Ponzi scheme shitcoin, but it creates an incentive for people to start contributing value to a decentralized community focused on a goal. Okay, I actually think we need to shift for the next talk, which is going to be a signaling discussion. Do you want to intro it?
It's a project Telegraph, and the goal is to build a website where if you have a question about what's going on in Ethereum and how people feel about it, to have a place for everyone to go and see it. So like, are we going to move, should we move the hard fork date back? Should we change the mining incentive? And a credible source of gathering all that information into one place.
Yeah, so if everyone can just stand up for me, I got to move chairs around because we're going to do this one differently. It's going to be a fun experiment. Yeah, 5. We're going to do the 5 chairs. Yeah, 5 chairs in a circle, and then. Thank you. Okay, take a seat right here. Thank you. So, yeah, we got like 3 minutes. Now, the discussion isn't all about Telegraph. It's about signaling in general. So, but Telegraph obviously should be a topic. Yeah, for sure. So the next talk over at Decentralize Now is going to be on signaling. It's an open discussion, so if anybody wants to talk about signaling in Ethereum and how important it is to governance, we have some really awesome speakers here. So come on by. We start in about 3 minutes. sometimes. Underscore, man. Well, and where is the underscore? Yeah. Oh my God, is it after of? Or is it after made?
Yeah.
It's a tough one, but you know, they get it. Maybe soon it'll be a thing.
Yeah.
It's like, no, duh, it's made of underscore tin. It's made of tin, man.
I'm committed at this
Yeah,
point.
exactly. Okay, well, I'll take another swig. Fruit is so nice.
A little bit of banana rama in there.
It's like crazy high. God.
Hey, Vlad. That's who I wanted.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get Vlad, and then we'll be in a circle.
Yep.
Vlad.
No, wait, hold on. Well, let's put these flat.
Oh yeah.
So we're going round table discussion. Are you here for the signaling? What? Consensus? Yes.
Yes.
So, yes, exactly.
Yep.
Hey guys, so this talk is just going to be another roundtable discussion. Hey Vlad, we're going to talk about the. You want?
Except for when you don't need to. Except for you really need to buy.
Oh, he doesn't want in. He knows he'd get trapped talking about signaling. He's trying to sleep. So the point of this discussion is really about governance and how do we reach a consensus for a blockchain protocol when no one knows what other people are thinking, right? And it's really an open discussion about any topics that we want, kind of any subtopics that we want. So do you guys have, I know he wants to talk about Tenegraph, which is an awesome project that I also work on. But maybe you guys have a topic of discussion that you want to make sure we get covered. No? Do you have a topic at all? Yeah. Okay. Okay, cool. Well, do you want to kick us off and tell us why this is important?
It's important because as each member of the blockchain in isolation, information isolation leads to fear and not knowing what everyone else is doing. And in the case of a blockchain, you sort of all have to move together. You all have to move forward. And if you're not sure that the person next to you is also going to move forward, it's hard to move in confidence. And as we with Ethereum and elsewhere, like any blockchain, as trying to develop and progress, we have to make sure we're all at least on the same page about what everyone else is thinking before we can even decide for ourselves how to move forward. And so any thoughts or other things that you just came in, Zaki? Yeah. So we're doing a talk on signaling and governance and reaching consensus and if there's anything you want to go over while we're in here? Just coming into chat? Okay. Some observations from the space. So my project is gathering all these signals and putting them into one place and trying to show it. And it's a project called Telegraph. And when I talk with people initially, the first reaction is pretty much universally, oh yeah, we definitely need that. Oh yeah, we definitely need that. It would be great if everyone was on the same page about should we move the hard fork forward or back, or at least on the same page about what other people's opinions are, right? And so I could say for sure this group is feeling this way, and I am for sure feeling this way, and not having your ideas about it. Oh yes, Laura.
How do you go about actually pulling these opinions and remarks from people? Like, is there some sort of bot that's like pulling information from people, or is someone selecting whose voices are important? Are people like self-selecting? How does that work?
It's a little bit of a mix. So there's a couple of things going on. There's like coin signaling and gas voting signaling that is not that, I mean, could be biased in some sense, but it's at least it's at least Sybil resistant to a certain degree, right? And that gives kind of its own unique, and it also has its own unique challenges. And in the case of the stances, and it's a pretty, there's a combination of having a list of influential people and seeing how they view different EIPs, and then also people just saying, hey, this is a Twitter post saying this person supports this EIP, or this is a Reddit post where this person supports this EIP, and on the site uploading it so everyone can see it. And they had this for Bitcoin when they were going through their hard fork called CoinDance, and that's a lot of where the inspiration of we really need something like this for Ethereum came from, and why it hasn't happened yet, and now we're here to kind of make it happen.
Yeah, and you can see right now there's this debate. Are we pushing what? Should we push back this hard fork or not? Right? And Afri and Peter and all the guys who are really in charge of interfacing with that, they get people coming out on Twitter and Reddit saying, "You guys suck. Why can't you just push this hard fork through?" Right? And who knows who these people are, right? And like poor Afri has to like defend himself on Twitter. He doesn't know what other people are. Does the whole world think that this hard fork needs to be pushed ASAP, or is there split opinion? Who thinks what? Instead he just has to like see his Twitter feed and the people that are willing to either support what he says or like talk shit. Whereas if we had a website where you could basically see what other people are signaling about this topic, then you could have a coin vote where anyone with Ether could vote on whether or not this is yes or no, and they could go there and with a click of a button sign a message from their MetaMask account or something like that, and boom, there's what the hodlers are thinking. And then Slockit is working on this thing called gas voting, and really it's a coin vote, gas vote, and other things, right, where they measure the amount of gas that you've spent, right? So that's like a user vote. And then there's the amount of gas that contracts that your account has deployed have used, right? So if you're Nick Johnson and you deployed ENS, then you're going to be like, there's a lot of people spending a lot of gas on that application. So your account will have a huge vote on the developer spectrum, right? And then, of course, if you just have a lot of Ether, that's a normal coin vote. And so you could, with one button click, you would be able to see, oh, well, this guy is a developer, and the people out of the people who have spent a lot of have deployed contracts that have had a lot of gas spent on them. This is what they say, and it looks like it's 59%, or in this case, it'd be 98% support Afri and Peter's push to delay the hard fork. And then they could actually point to that and be like, look, all the developers, all the users, these guys are on this site. They're being polled right now, and it sure looks like they support our decision, and they can feel confident in the decisions they're making. This is also another one for like another contentious issue is EIP 999, right? Where maybe the developers, the users, the DApps, and miners, and everyone might have their own opinion, and it's a contentious issue. So we need a way to actually poll these people and aggregate that information. The funny thing is, all this information is already out there, right? Influencer stances. Hey, Anna. Great. It's all out there, and it's really easy to grab it, but it's got to be all in one place, so people can easily go to one spot and say, oh yeah, okay, Vitalik says this, Gavin says this, and Vlad says this, but these guys all disagree. Okay, whatever. At least I know, And so the challenge is really like, how do we sort that data? How do we aggregate it? And it's going to be contentious, right?
Let's jump in here. Yeah, just a thought on that. Like I agree, for something where it's maybe a technical decision to make, and if you might want to value more the technical, or people who have gas, as in they built things of utility, so maybe their opinion should be worth more in certain ways. But that might could have its consequences in becoming an echo chamber if people who are more technically minded will probably think a certain way versus maybe the general public who would use it, and then you get something like Trump happening again, where those who were outside of certain influence maybe felt disenfranchised and then rallied and went a certain way. I don't know. I'm just wondering, are echo chambers a consideration in this, in that we might favor, it's a double-edged thing that I do agree that technical people should make technical decisions, but might that form an echo chamber that will bite us in the back later? Just a thought.
I mean, they did mention that, for the gas voting at least, you would have the user side, right, spending gas, and then the contracts that you're receiving gas. And that way you can see when an issue is contentious, because the users would all go one way and the developers would all go the other way or something like that. And
I guess and maybe even for that user one, the gas, it's more so the deployer of a contract, so someone who's technically competent built something that people used, but it's still not necessarily the users voting, but maybe that's not an issue in that case.
Well, for that one, there's the contracts one, but it's like this address also has spent gas, and that would be a user vote. So like with one vote, you would be voting as a user, as a developer, as a miner, and as a coin hodler, because your account has all those aspects to it. But the main way, there's always going to be an echo chamber in the different stakeholder categories. And that's why it's important to identify who are the stakeholders in these consensus protocols, right? There's miners, there's important node operators like exchanges, right? There's general influencers, people who are popular on Twitter, like Vlad, for instance. He's not actually really a dev. He's a researcher. He's not going to deploy any contracts, but clearly he has influence. And so he's a stakeholder in the consensus protocol. If he says something, then people will listen, and that will have influence, right? There's also devs, obviously, and levels of devs. There's core devs that are working on the protocol, and then there's DApp developers, right, who are using the protocol. And so if you can actually aggregate information in a way where it's organized information so that you have the different stakeholders, you'll see, oh yeah, this echo chamber here, this echo chamber here, this echo chamber here, but then you'll have all the different pieces who have different stakes. The miners are not going to be excited about lowering the gas from 3 ether to 2, lowering the block reward from 3 to 2 ether, clearly, right? They're not going to be into that. But they are going to be big fans of the proof of work algorithm changing so that we can get rid of ASICs. Or maybe not, but now there's a push, if the hard fork gets delayed, does that get added in to this next hard fork? And all the miners would, of course, say yes, whereas maybe the core devs would say no. But maybe enough core devs have actually tested it that it is going through. And Afri, who works for Parity, he just hadn't seen that there was a lot of support for this, but if this website existed, he would be like, oh, wow, all these developers are actually saying it would be good to integrate this in. Maybe I need to do a second look and see what I thought was wrong, maybe that's been fixed, and maybe it can go in the hard fork.
I just had a random thought about gas voting. If you remember that contract that I think Phil Diane was working on, where like it stores random data on the blockchain, and then later you can get your gas back by releasing that random data. Would things like that have to be taken account of, because they could probably skew things?
So that's gas token. I think that was his thing. That was about showing how in high volume times and like the gas prices go up, you could actually sort of like gather gas to sell at this higher rate and make money off it. I mean, that was a cool experiment that showed a problem in the initial system. I think what you're describing is something like if they were able to do something similar and then force a vote, or like
you'd use gas token, and then you'd have, or like the person who deployed the gas token would have a way larger gas.
Yeah, if, for instance, this is a great example, because at least the way we expect to do this website is that every like gas token or the gas thing is specifically Slockit is working on that, right? And they developed that. They can change the algorithm to blacklist gas that was spent by addresses that are participating in that program, and include the tokens. People who've bought a lot of gas in advance, maybe they should have some kind of stake, and that algorithm is going to be tweaked. And this is the interesting part, because we're aggregating the data, we're not necessarily developing that system. So what happens if somebody like Slockit decides to change the algorithm that they're using to influence a certain vote? I mean, these are definitely real concerns. The nice thing about signaling is it's signaling. It's not voting. So you don't have some outcome that's like guaranteed to happen. So if these signals have to maintain legitimacy, otherwise they won't be listened to. And if there's a problem with the algorithm, or something breaks, or somebody's fucking with it, like, I mean, Slockit already did the DAO, right? So like, come on, they probably fucked this up too. I say that because I worked with Slockit and did the DAO. But so like, yeah.
And another piece is like, if you zoom out, signaling's great, right? As you zoom in on each individual signaling type, you find flaws like that. And what's like, after you realize that, the next realization is, as long as you're transparent and understand what could be the weaknesses, then me as a user can recognize that it may be a little bit, it may be a little bit there. And the important part is not to just have one of those, because if you have one, then that becomes like a total failure point. But if you have 5 different kind of signals, and each of them has their own unique weakness, then you have this web of supporting information to give that creates this 3D picture of what's really going on, and overcomes the individual obstacles that each individual signal has.
Yeah, so I got here a little late, so maybe you guys already touched this, but this is the gameability issue. Did you talk about that for the first 10 minutes? No. Okay. So the concern so I'm Anna, and I've also been working on this project, so gameability, yeah. So I think that's been a criticism or a concern lobbed at this project. So people have been like, oh, but if you start collecting this stuff and formalizing this stuff, then it's gameable. And I think what you are describing is like one possible gameable thing, although I think that would have to be something that's taken into account. I think one of the things that I find so funny about the argument that this system is in any way more gameable is if you look at Twitter and Reddit, which is currently those are the sources that are used the most to define community sentiment. they are so gamed. They're constantly gamed. You see them, like, that is what happened with Trump and Brexit. Like, those have been gamed in larger contexts, and we see it being gamed now. So then I think the idea here is have multiple, like you just mentioned this, but have multiple signals, which would then add this, like, larger meta overview, so that, say, one of those systems gets gamed. I mean, to game all of them would require a very different skill set and far more energy and far more money. Yeah.
You mean a nation state?
Yeah, nation state. But I mean, if a nation state wants to go after Bitcoin, they could also do that.
But how's a nation state? Are they gonna hack Vitalik's, Vlad's, Gavin's Twitter, you know, and Afri's Twitter, and like get all these guys to make stances? And then, like, are they going to hack exchanges and get them to say that they support a fork or not?
If you're talking specifically in this, okay, yeah, bringing the focus in specifically to this point of changes, yeah. But otherwise, gaming all the different sources of public sentiment obviously just went through, and it's coming clear in the 2016 election in the U.S. did happen, right? Whether it was Twitter, Facebook, all of those otherwise large pools, they were gamed, and they're still being gamed.
And something we're a little bit of the fish in the water, looking at the fish in the blockchain space. But things like coin signaling and gas voting are way less gameable than traditionally what we have, right? And of course, it's easy to find the flaws in things, and it's a lot harder to put all. It's more important to see them and move forward, and build something with it, right? Like actually develop, because I think there's a little bit of paralysis when it comes to this problem, because as soon as someone sees, hey, this is a thing, then everyone kind of steps back. And I mean, Ethereum's been around for a lot of years, and we still don't really have a good way of doing this. And a lot of, I think that fear comes from, if you're observing a system, you are somehow interacting with it. And by interacting with it, you've modified it and changed it, and we've sort of tainted the purity of what's going on. And and so when I hear that, I kind of hear almost a fear of self-awareness of what's really going on, and yeah.
That's actually, I noticed that too. Like, so people who are selling something have that problem where it's like, if you're selling something, you're really into something, if you're dogmatic about something, if you're like, I believe and I want you to believe, then you sometimes don't want all of the information that is true. There's like things that can interrupt your sales pitch. They wouldn't call it a sales pitch, but that is kind of like what it is in essence. And I think that may explain some of what I find sort of irrational resistance to a project like this, which is literally just like casting light, non-binding. Hey, if you want to have an overview and have a chance to see the picture from the top with all of these different metrics, here's a way to do it. And then people are like, no, why? But it messes with my dogma.
I mean, I think we get over concerned. I think that naturally humans see negative things larger than positive things. So like, I've heard something like it takes 6 positive comments to overcome 1 negative comment, like in your mind when you're reading this stuff. And it's like, there's a lot of people that are unconditionally supporting this idea that we need signaling in Ethereum, but there's a couple of people that all they do is talk shit. So of course they're gonna say like, oh, but there's this problem, that problem, that problem. For me, the most important part is that it's a community project, and that, like, if you look at coin.dance, which is the only real example of signaling in the crypto space, and this is for Bitcoin, it's actually run by Bitcoin maximalists, and they don't do they do a pretty good job. They try to be pretty fair, but for sure they're not going to work with us. So even though we would love to work with them, right? Because they don't like Ethereum. They don't want to help. They're not in it for the idea of signaling. They're in it to help Bitcoin, right? They're also not fans of Bitcoin Cash, but they do kind of do a little bit for them, but they don't really give like minor votes or node voting awareness for that group either. And so, if what's really cool about Tenograph is that it has this opportunity where anyone can interact with it and support it. It doesn't have its financial backing coming from, one source. Well, okay, right now it kind of does, but like it's open because it's on Giveth and anyone can donate to support it. And we have like Giveth and Aragon are the groups supporting it now, but anyone can support it. And if they want a feature, they want to put up like we want this minor voting application to be on there, someone can fund a bounty to put that on the website, and then we will use that bounty to put pay somebody to actually make that happen. And anyone can do it, and it can be a community-run project. And I think that's really important to stop it from being gamed from above secretly,
Just ask a question. And I forget the fellow's name. Was it Harry from that spoke from Inira or whatever? Spoke in the main room this morning. He talked. He had been at W3C and now he's at Inira or whatever it was. He said one of the comment was no gods, and sort of this whole religious aspect, and looking back over the last 25 years of different protocols and standards, and how taking religious aspects. How is too much weight given to that core team, the Vitaliks, the Vlads? Is that? I mean, what's the danger there?
I definitely think too much weight is in there, but there's kind of a power law dynamic in just forever. Like, Coca-Cola sells way too much Coke, right? And I thought Coke was illegal anyway. What are they doing? No, so. But there's people end up focusing on just a few things because it's simple from the outside. But at the same time, these guys because of that, they also have a lot of influence, and some people who have way more influence than people even know are not really talked about. Specifically, I think Peter and Afri. Afri is one of the main guys behind the Parity client and is the main interface for people. And then Peter, who does the Geth client, these guys are the ones making the real decisions. They're going to listen to Vitalik, and they're going to see Twitter, and they're going to see these things. But I mean, if those two guys agreed, we should still push for hard fork in December, then it would happen, right? And I don't think, unless you are really deep in the game, you can't know that. And I don't know. I think if anything, it's definitely too much weight given to some people and not enough weight given to others. And we also need to realize who has this power.
A few weeks ago, I have a podcast called Zero Knowledge, which you guys probably know. I did an interview with Hudson, who is the guy running the core dev calls, and this is not the first time he's mentioned this, but what ends up happening, unfortunately, is the core devs get together every 2 weeks and they talk about the issues, and that's actually where a lot of the sort of discussion and conversation about upgrades will happen, what will be included in a fork, what's a contentious EIP. That's where the conversation is going down. And Hudson organizes it, and a lot of the core devs on the call may not know that, or they may not be that interested in a lot of these things. And then he's sitting there kind of going I get the sense that we're into it. Are we into it? And then people are kind of yeah, okay. And then he kind of is okay, we're into it. And he calls it Decree by Hudson, and it's super bad. That's not a good thing. That's a problem. And he says it's a problem. I feel like even the influencers that you're describing feel that this is not, too much weight is being put on them. And the reason for this is that there's a lack of transparency into what is actually going on. You hear a lot of buzz from different places. Some influencers may have a bit of a better view. They'll voice it. People are attracted to it. But really, there should be more information going through the entire community so that good opinions can be formed, and so that Hudson is not the one who gets to make the decision.
A few weeks ago, I did. So
I feel like it's kind of trying to meet in the middle as much as you can, because the ones who have incredible influence, if they had more realistic information or better information, you can kind of pull them closer to, over here. And then those who are underrepresented through coin voting and gas voting and other mechanisms, they become more representative. So although like the power law dynamic, I think is just a part of human nature, we can at least bend the curve to be more favorable than it was. And it.
Have you looked at things like multi-stakeholder cooperative type business structures? Because I mean, a cooperative business model, and they're not just earthy, crunchy grocery stores, right? I think it's $2.5 trillion flows through cooperative or mutual organizations. Most cooperatives, it's one person, one vote. But there are different structures where, because of either capital requirements, that there may be some members that have, so they modify some of the governance and voting structures. It may be something, so you take something like a utility. In the United States, 40% of electricity is produced by cooperative-owned utilities. Capital investment required, obviously, significantly higher than a grocery store. So they do there are different ways, and they modify the governance models and the voting structures, but they all tie back to the same idea of benefiting the community. There's 7 principles that all cooperatives globally tie back to some foundation from 1844 in the UK, where they all come from. So it's something that might be of use to look at.
What would you call that?
It's they're called multi-stakeholder cooperatives. Actually, the University of Wisconsin has a whole cooperative. I don't know if it's a business school, but they have a lot of stuff. The University of Wisconsin.
Thank you.
They're not just earthy, crunchy grocery stores, right?
I think the one criticism that I could imagine being like, so say that was, I think it's really good to read up on that stuff, and I think it's important to, but I also think the sensibility of the community needs to be taken into account, and things like formalized cooperative boards and stuff seems like it wouldn't fit, at least not now. But I definitely think that inspiration could be taken from something like that.
Take something like a utility. In the United States, 40% of electricity is produced by cooperative-owned utilities.
More related to the space we're in and like our own sensibilities, it might be interesting to have like a TCR where people could register their own metrics to put on your front end or something similar to that.
I would like to come back to what you said with the cooperative model. We see some organizations trying that out. Our Chain Cooperative is one of the blockchain projects which tries to be cooperative. But I think what is not compelling for a lot of members is the power structures which are built by the board of directors, right? So you have a strong board, the board can overrule. It really depends on how are people able to really cast their vote? How is the infrastructure represented? How do you ensure that there is no, no overruling of the board over the members, right? So such things are very dependent on the infrastructure you provide, and then it comes back to you need a trustworthy infrastructure for identity and voting. So a smart contract for the co-op to represent that governance model. And I haven't really seen that, that this is done or executed well. I think it's not the governance model itself. I think there are many models which have the advantages, but we haven't really seen a lot of those models being implemented on-chain so that they are trustworthy and that we don't have the same flaws of, centralization of power and influence.
Just to say what you were saying about token or someone creating their own metrics, absolutely. I really like this idea, like you were saying, it's normally one person, one vote. There have been little sub-experiments to identify uniqueness. There's actually a Giveth project that we support called Bright ID. That's like proof of uniqueness. But also there have been smaller projects, just like at DevCon 2, Piper Marion created a token that was like, yo, you know, I trust these 4 people to be identity oracles, and we will give you 1 token to an address that says you came to DevCon 2, right? And so that token, if anyone, it could be used as a polling token, and you could create this thing, 1 person, 1 vote. Hey, should we return the funds to parity, right? Well, this is 1 metric, right? What do the, you know, DevCon 2 people say? What do the coin holders say? What do the users say that use gas? What do the influencers say? And if you have all those things and you can add other metrics, then this could be a really interesting opportunity, you know? But in general, we need signaling. We need to know what other people are thinking. You can't reach consensus in a consensus protocol if you have no idea what other people are going to do. It doesn't work.
I fully agree with you. We don't really see the community right now. There is no way of self-reflecting on the state of the community we are in, and then it's super hard for ourselves to have a position or navigate between the other positions in the ecosystem. What I'm really impressed with is what work was done on signaling outside of the blockchain space, where we can, I think, greatly benefit from. Just to name one of them is Polis, for example, of representation of opinions, of communities. There's a lot of research in that direction where we, I think, can be open with, and where we can build bridges to accelerate the way how we can gather sentiment and understand where the community stands. Yeah, I can talk more about that. It's like just imagine the value for parties of existing representative democracies to know where their voter base is at. So this is an old problem, right? And there's a huge value for them to know that. So there, when a lot of money went into that space to figure out the sentiment of the citizens, to be able to have a clear position as a party. So those are exactly the same researches we can leverage, and tools like Polis we can leverage to accelerate our path to give signaling tools to the community. Right, and there are other tools like Lumeo, you might have heard about it, which is more a decision-making tool, not so much a signaling tool, right? And the practices from the practitioner side, and when I say practitioners, I mean like the practices we can leverage in an off-chain community where we come together to form consent or rough consensus, which are not hierarchically based, which are self-empowering, are there and are around for decades. We just need to tap into that culture and bring it to the startups we create.
I love the idea of taking this, the research that's already been done and applying it. And I think another space where we have the opportunity to do that is in statistics. There's this idea of something being statistically significant. And there are mathematical numbers that say like this is now statistically significant. This isn't. And when it comes to signaling, you have, I mean, how much of a signal, how loud does it have to be a significant signal? That's a really big open question. Yeah, and a lot of research to go into it, and we can borrow from the model that's already been done from the mathematics to be able to inform that.
When it comes to mathematics, maybe I can add some points. I mean, finding consensus is about finding a good optima in the strategy in a kind of repeated game here. And what signaling is there nothing but sheep talk, which is a mechanism in mathematics to achieve good strategies in repeated games. So, yes, cheap talk. What you do is basically cheap talk for in game theory. So.
I guess cheap talk is not an insult in this case.
I wanted to connect to what you said before with the threshold. What we have seen with threshold is also the research in machine learning systems with signals, right? So I think we should, or I think we can get inspired by nature, and I think nature is a great architect. So going back to neuroscience and speaking about thresholds when neurons fire and all that stuff is, I think, something we can take inspiration from to also work with the systems we build. And humans can be understood as nodes which have a network and connectivity, and if a good signal comes in and it overachieves a specific threshold, we might share that idea, right? Or that signal. So I think we can get really inspired at that side and use that also to define protocols for signal passing in a signaling environment where we gather the signals from the community. So from the humans, I would say that's the best spot to gather the signals from, right? From everybody of us.
What do you estimate? How binding are the decisions made on your platform?
Absolutely not binding at all. It is. So, there's kind of two ways to think about it. If the information is already there and the pressure is somewhat already there, and it's better organized and it's better verified and it's better collected and seen all at once. Yeah. And what was the other part? Maybe did you have another thing? Okay. I'll remember it in just a second.
I think signaling is one of the strongest powers you can introduce to your existing systems as well. Because if you think about Germany, it's a representative democracy. The parties want to be re-elected. And what we have seen is, for example, the pressure after Fukushima to opt out of nuclear energy was huge. Because the population was hugely against nuclear energy. On the other side, we had things like TTIP, where 98% of the population was against it, but there was no clear path of signaling that. So there were demonstrations, but nobody really knew how many people were really against it. So if you have a clear path, a trustworthy path or process to signal, this creates massive amount of pressure. And especially when it's transparent, I believe that existing parties are pushed into compliance. Because if not, they will create a huge outrage through a huge outrage in the civil society, because they see that they act directly against their interests, right?
And I guess this is where I would come back to the earlier comment. When you if the conversation specifically around development of the Ethereum protocol and things of that nature is one thing, but when you start expanding out into the much larger societal frame, the potential for manipulation, even of the signals, it becomes much, much more significant. And then it really does become important to check, because that's essentially what happened. You could argue it's happened within Brexit, happened within the United States in the last election. It's happened possibly in Germany right now with some of the right-wing populists in other areas. So it becomes a really tricky balancing act, I think, to try and figure out, is manipulation going on? Is it truly a signal, or is it manipulation?
If you guys were here for Vlad's talk in the morning, where he defined legitimacy in his own terms. His definition of that word was, I can't recall exactly what he said, but it was something like, something is legitimate if generally everybody can agree. Everybody acts like it's true or legitimate, yeah.
P.S. This is coming to you from Berlin, Germany, a place where a legitimacy of a regime and some systems were, I mean, that's scary a little bit to think about that.
What I wanted to say about that was there's some concern as to whether a signaling system would be considered legitimate. Will people consider it I'm not part of this signaling system, therefore my opinion isn't counted in it, therefore it's not legitimate because it doesn't take into account what I think. But I think we've already addressed that quite a bit.
There's a little bit of, I don't know, I guess I hate using this word because trust has such like a bad vibe all of a sudden in certain conversations. But at some level, the core devs are going to make decisions on things, and people are going to make decisions on things. It's not like core devs are the only ones that make decisions. I got all of the stakeholders or all of the people involved have to make a decision. And if they're unable to see through some kind of influence, then we're already kind of lost a little bit. And so then the other side of that is there's a lot of education that needs to happen to help people see, oh, this is what this signal really, this is the significance or not significance. And then to the point of whether or not the site or things become significant is as long as people are using it. I know. I mean, in the technical sense, if it's useful, I feel like it's significant. If it's useful to at least some, if it's useful to the devs, if it's useful to people who have the questions, and then they want to know these answers of, hey, what are other people thinking about, then it's at least significant enough for me.
Maybe a different approach to the signaling is defining these systems as defining the systems by the signals they care about, right? So if you're building a project, instead of saying this project is like, no, Ethereum, decentralized computer, why don't you define this project exactly by the signals it cares about? And then there is no doubt on what signals are valid and what things are not, because the project itself is defined by these signals. For example, I was working on like governance systems where you, for example, decide the metrics. So the first thing you do is you define the system. So if you want, for example, build a water plan, you define the metrics that the people needs to participate on that system, right? And you define, for example, in case of identity, you can define certain metrics that the people needs to have in order to participate in the system.
But this means that you decide how exactly the processes look like, and that you claim legitimacy of making those decisions for other people, because you will be the architect. And I find it very, very problematic, to be honest, to take that approach. On the other hand, I don't know how to do it better. But the problem is, if you design a system, you bias the system, I would say. We are all biased, right? And this means if you set up the metrics in a certain way, you will heavily influence what the system can do and can't do. And yeah, so maybe you can share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree that's an imperfect system, right? But I think we want to go towards that there. But what you said is like, yes, it kind of lock you in, but you also can make these metrics like a formula that you can redefine. So you can have other metrics that allows you to redefine this formula. At the same time, most of my understanding is those systems are decentralized by nature, and they're voluntary. And this voluntary is like a key element, because like in today kind of state structures, they're like, I'm locked in on where I live and what I have to do, and etc. Those systems I can opt out. So if I disagree in a lot of the system, I can just fork it, right? So that's like I
mean, the whole freedom to fork is really what enables a lot of this experimentation to happen, because if since no one is locked into the system, then the dominant strategy turns to your system is only as big as everyone's willing to work together, and there isn't a way to force or coerce someone to be a part of the system or to stay part of the system. Yeah.
I would partly disagree, because we speak always about the freedom of forking, but there are a lot of barriers for forking. So if you want to fork, it's super expensive to fork as a minority because you lose a huge network effect. So you better not fork. And we see that, for example, with all the parity funds which are lost. I mean, a lot of people have an interest of forking, of fixing that. But we see how it's not happening because it's not strong enough, it's not big enough. There are like enough people which don't care. And there are other prerequisites for forking. You need to have the knowledge, you need to be able to drive the project forward from the developer side. You need to have the resource freedom to fork it, to survive the costs of the fork, right? So I would say forking, it's a very nice thing to speak about. It's in theory very nice, but the reality is that you need a community to fork. The reality is that you need to have the know-how, the community to drive that forward. And that is not as simple as copying the code.
But at least the freedom is there, right? Which it's really not. I would love to fork out of the US. Really would love that. Yeah, I want to fork out of Trump land. Let me out of there. I can't. I don't have that freedom. And that's the cool thing. It is still a voluntary choice. You know, you're still like, well, okay, it's not optimal for me to fork, so I'm going to stay with the main network because getting my funds back is not as valuable as maintaining maintaining my role in this community.
I mean, I think what you're trying to say with the difficulty in forking is it's not appropriate for things like bike shed issues, or like really small issues that very few people care about. You wouldn't fork out of the network if like you want to change the color of the logo or something, right? I don't know.
Also, there's a point. Let's assume your system works, and there's a hypothetical decision for a kind of hard fork, and all the core developers are against this. Let's assume, but the people on your side are completely for this. They can still do it, right? I mean, they don't depend on the. We depend on the governments. If we are against something, we cannot change it, or we cannot change the law. But this still can be easily changed, and even against the will of the core developers, I would say.
Like the barrier of entry to forking is not only a problem, but I think I like the way that you articulate it. I vibe with a lot. The nice thing that still exists is that in the case of a fork that's already planned, like in an upgrade, even the smallest participant can choose to go along or not. And at that level, at least you're not able to force or coerce someone to say, I will choose this fork over this fork.
I think when we speak about forking as a governance mechanism, I think we are speaking about a final resort, like a very heavy decision, which is usually connected to high costs. And I think to have a little bit more differentiated debate, we need multiple layers of governance, where minor changes can happen for smaller groups, which might live on shards on top of the core protocol, which changes very slowly, while we have heavy innovation in the shards, right?
And like, if you want to change the logo, you can make an EIP, and boom. At least that's how we do it in Ethereum.
Wouldn't it be so easier to make us? Wouldn't it be so much easier to make a system if everyone knew what everyone was thinking about certain issues? That's a huge barrier of entry to moving the protocol forward, even on small things.
I like that idea of the shards kind of like being the little experimentation ground, though. I hadn't thought of that.
I think if we look at the world how it is, we see many cultures, and we see that people organize in a decentralized way with their cultures for like thousands of years, and that we don't find a way to find a consensus on the logo if we don't want to homogenize or say make everything the same. Okay, so so if we really want to have a diverse society, we need to find a way to have a agreed shared consensus on like the core layer, and have a way to have different representations on the shards or on a higher level or on the community level, right? So I think it's super important to have also different governance structures for the different layers. Because where do we want to make, for example, content decisions? If we all signal that a DApp is malicious, right? It's fine. We can signal that, but there will be no way we effectively fork out a DApp, because the core protocol and the core devs always move too slow to catch up with a small group of people which just, for example, copy the code base, change some things in the code base so it doesn't have the same fingerprint, and then redeploy it in a different shard, or say to a different, for example, Ethereum Classic or whatever, right? So they can always hop away. So if we think about those responsibilities as well, and that we don't want to create a weaponizable platform for a minority, right? Then we need to think also about where do we want to have content governance? Where do we want to have kind of social contracts? And I don't want to have them for core protocol, right? Because this would mean enforcement for everybody who uses that protocol.
I mean, that's like the dream for me, where all of this is kind of going, is more ways to do more things more effectively, I guess. And how are we doing on time?
Yeah, we are waiting for Flurkel.
Oh, okay. Now I interrupted my train of thought. So does it?
So just to jive off that, I mean, what are these blockchains good for anyway? Right? Like, we always have this disassociation between blockchains and people. Blockchains are here to organize people. There are social contracts implied on these blockchains, and you don't know it often when you're using that blockchain, right? Just like you don't know the social contract or the organizational structure when you go into a Safeway, you don't or some grocery store. You don't know if it's a co-op or do you care? You go there for groceries, you go out, right? But the actual people that are organizing that system, they have social contracts that they live with, and I think that it's sad that we forget that sometimes. And if someone wants to fork a minority out of this social community, I actually think that's okay, and it's their right. It's the right of the community that is using this protocol to decide the right of association, right? Like if there's some horrible thing going on in Ethereum and everyone's against it, and we have a way to understand that everyone is against it, or such a large majority, then I don't think the core devs would blink to actually exercise their rights, the ability to write the code, to allow people to upgrade the software, just like they did with the DAO. I mean, we basically did that to the DAO hacker, right? We basically said, hey, you're breaking the social contract of Ethereum, so we're stealing your money, and back. And I don't know that that's a problem. I actually think that's definitely a feature.
I fully agree with you. And what we have seen, like with Ethereum Classic, was a fork of the social, say, contract as well, right? It was like a decision of a moral decision taken from a community, right? But what I want to give a thought about is like, can we sustain that model in the current governance structure for 10 billion people?
I mean, if we go back to shards and stuff, if every little shard has its own contract and every little group can like be left and joined at will, yes, you can. But like as a large thing, it becomes harder and harder to enforce any social contract that you want to have.
I'm picturing now a dystopian sharded future where these little tribes go in such different directions that they can no longer understand one another. Sorry.
Well, one wonderful point. I think we see that right now because we live in different echo chambers and people don't understand each other anymore, right? So that is interesting. I think we have that already as well. Oh, Swamp City people.
That was a really fun discussion on signaling, guys. Thank you so much. Yeah, here. We're changing formats or changing topics. Same format. Next topic is DAICOs, decentralized autonomous ICOs, right? Maybe do you want to introduce the topic?
Yes. So, good morning. The topic is DAICOs, or why ICOs suck, is the topic of this discussion. The idea is that we try to find many reasons why an ICO sucks, and then say like, oh, this is how we could solve that. The problems. So yeah, you start with the first problem. Yeah. Oh, really?
I think ICOs suck.
Oh, okay.
And one of the big things that I hate about ICOs is that all the money goes to a multi-sig and there's no accountability for how it's spent. Do you have how does a DAICO solve that?
Yeah, to me that's the first and biggest problem, right? Like if you do an ICO, then basically all your funding is very kind of centralized, and you need governance to disperse the funds. If you do it like totally decentralized, you end up with the DAO. So and so a new solution could be to have a DAICO. Can you maybe, Griff, like explain the basic concept of a DAICO?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if I'm the best person to do this, but I can at least say like the DAO would be a DAICO, right? Where people sent money in, the smart contract actually held the money, not multi-sig of some guys that some people can control. And the money had specific rules on how it was going to be spent. And how you write those rules is up to you, right? But ideally, it would be decentralized to some decent extent, right? It would be autonomous, as in there wouldn't be, I mean, this is where it gets sketchy for me because I always like escape hatches and, things like fail-safe problems. But in a true DAICO, there's probably none of that, like the DAO. But you have a way to raise funds, and then you have a design for how those funds are going to be spent, and a community that decides how those funds are spent.
So the idea is, to me, for in a DAICO, that instead of getting a lot of funding in for a promise that you might deliver, that you actually only get money in for very precise, well written out tasks. So there's basically a value transition, or like a value change, instead of just creating like basically ending up with Ether and your new token. At least there's like value created in between, so the new token will only be created when the Ether has actually been transformed into like value. Yeah, maybe yeah, Sponette, can you talk a little bit about that?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add one more insight or like reflection on what we've done in the past. Is that one other challenge that I see with a traditional ICO is that in the beginning you're sort of in a modus where you want to raise money, and that's your primary focus. So you try your best to raise that money, and then you start out, and then like the problems that you guys described, I think they're very accurate. But I've also noticed one extra problem, that is that once you raised your funds basically, you start working, often there's no opportunity to raise additional funds because like you write a white paper, you state some sort of deliverables that you're promising to those people who are investing in your ICO. But it might be the case that later on you have some new insights, or maybe the technology has changed, so you're forced to change plans somehow, or it might be that your product is successful, but there's an opportunity to add a new feature to your project, for example, and obviously that hasn't been included into your white paper because you didn't know that opportunity at the moment you were writing your white paper. So I think that's another drawback of an ICO, that it doesn't sort of give continuity to to the growth of your community. So I think I think that's a second thing that's really lacking at the current way of an ICO. And I'm just curious also to see how a DAICO could solve that. So in my opinion, one of the ways to solve that would be that you create some sort of phases in there. So you first do like a round of fundraising, then
like executed, and that it's really like meritocratic. Once you do a good job, then you can enter a second phase, a second round of funding where people can actually fund again, and then it's really so. I just want to draw the contrast between like you're in the beginning in sort of a like an advertisement mode almost to raise as much money as you can, and you're not building anything, so it's really an empty promise at that moment. And then later on, once you've delivered on that promise, nobody can invest anymore because like the token is minted, so it indicates that you're not allowing second and third rounds of funding. So I'm assuming that situation. And then it's very difficult. So even though you have shown to the community that you're worthy to to spend these funds and to convert these funds that you've raised into actual value, that you cannot do like a second round of that. That's just something I wanted to add.
I wanted to say that I'm not against an ICO, because it kind of gives. What I think about DAICOs is, aren't we going towards politics again? Like what we want to change in the what we want to change in the current world, where people are kind of constantly trying to get votes, trying to get to convince other people. But we see in the current, in the society that people, especially the people around here, we don't like politics as it has become right now. And for me, an ICO is more like a, maybe it's not true, but it feels more like a dictatorship, and it has some benefits for it, because like you raise money, you say this is what we're gonna do, you get the money, and from that point on, you have whatever time you need to deliver whatever you wanted to deliver with the money. You kind of are in charge of that money, and I agree that we don't really have to, you don't have to say to anyone or like have to. Justify what you're doing. You're just doing what you believe is best, and as long as the people who are doing it amongst themselves have kind of common beliefs and a common belief system, and you feel that's good, for me it works more efficiently to kind of get to that goal. And in opposite to it with a DAICO, you will have to have a lot of time spending, a lot of people that have different ideas. It might diverge in all different directions, and you kind of get stuck in not getting anywhere, but like constantly doing politics. So that was my 50 cents.
Yeah, I think what I heard is you described hierarchy behavior against group behavior, or say that it's way harder to currently organize a swarm or get group sentiment than having a hierarchy making decisions. And I fully agree, because we know how hierarchies work. We know they are effective. The problem what I see with ICOs is that the last years, taking the model you described, led to a huge distrust in the models of ICOs, because I throw in a number, probably 97% of the projects which received ICO money will never deliver something like fully fledged, which will provide any value back. So I think the time of ICOs is ending, and we see that in the spending curves on ICOs, that people are less and less willing to invest in ICOs because they see the probable outcome, or the probability of a positive outcome is very small. So another thing you spoke about is responsibility. You're right. If you get the ICO money, nobody can hold you responsible. That's the problem why we have 97% of scam. So if we want to find new ways of building trust as a community to deliver on the promises we give, I think we need a way where we have more responsibility taken, or from the builders, which stay up and say, yeah, we are responsible for the money you give us.
I think a part of the solution to that, the responsibility, trust, developing that over time, as opposed to how ICOs currently worked, is what Flurkel was saying earlier with, like, you have smaller goals, you reach those goals, you fund those specific goals. If you can do something like having submission of goals be really easy, like, I think politics happens when there's a barrier to entry, right? You have less politics if it's extremely easy for everybody to participate in every single part of the system. And if everybody can do everything, then politics becomes less of an issue, because it's more reflective as to the entire group's intention, or like each individual's intention, what happens.
Adding to what you were saying before, I think when a problem with the ICOs is just it forces a top-down approach on design that it basically translates to immutability, and that's like what you were saying is we need tools to make that flexible. The problem is the social contract we had when we found this ICO was around white paper, was a rigid, very well-defined commitment. You were saying that that's kind of good, not the commitment, but the fact that you have this kind of power over resources, because that allows you the freedom and the space to create without kind of restrictions. That's why I get more or less. Maybe what we need is like an in-between, like thinking what, for example, the Ethereum Foundation have done, right? Like they also had an ICO, but the commitment for that was, yes, there was like the Ethereum project itself, but as a foundation, probably they've done also a lot for the space. There's like a social contract more than a white paper itself, right? So maybe we need to distinguish these two things, because it is important to have this kind of this freedom and these resources towards an idea, towards like a set of values that we all agreed. But I think it's wrong when these extreme resources are towards a very, very defined white paper protocol, whatever it is. Like.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of jiving off of what you were saying about it's not as efficient, and this is in general. I feel like the same thing, an argument that you use against decentralizing anything, right? It's just not as efficient, but it is more robust, right? If you have one group doing an ICO and they raise all these funds and they fail, the project's dead, right? But if you do a DAICO and you have, when I imagine a DAICO, I think of it like almost a bounty platform where you have a bunch of money here and you have someone who already architected an idea, like a roadmap of what needs to get done, and then those details get filled in by a few managers, which would be the normal ICO team, right? And they put bounties on these topics and they help manage those things through. But let's say that the whole team is flying an airplane and it crashes. Hey, all that money is sitting there. It's still accessible, right? There is a way for people to still do these bounties and the idea can survive because it's more robust, right?
But can't you just tokenize equity for that? So that you say, okay, you're shaking your head, I think you're next in line. But there you also have this kind of robustness that if the entire team is hit by a bus, you still have the idea, you have some kind of some kind of shell around this. So I don't really get what's the difference between a DAICO and equity tokenization.
I would like to ask the question really what we mean when we speak about DAICO. Because I think that there are different understandings of it, and my take on it would be a decentralized ICO means that there is no architect team which is then in the role of being the fund managers, for example, but a zero trust model where it's possible through the governance structure provided to use the community to legitimize decisions and empower people to become kind of validators for the community to drive the directions. But I think that this directly translates into all the challenges we see in distributed governance. How to legitimize decisions, how do you see trust? It's like super difficult. So the far end of the ICOs, in my view, is like fully distributed systems, including distributed bounty systems, to execute on a vision which is shared by a community and shared values. Yeah.
Just maybe can I go maybe a different point to touch is what I really like about if you do this kind of step-by-step funding and executing approach, that also projects can how do you say that, like wind down for a while, You know, sometimes you see like, yeah, but we're kind of waiting on Whisper to evolve to a certain stage where we can actually use it. And so I really like if you're not sitting on all this money, right? But you only fund like the things you can actually do. You can just kind of pause your project, right? And nobody will freak out about it. Also, the thing we see where ICOs start out as like genuine projects, but then turn into a scam, and then they become back like genuine because there's like new people involved, etc. I think if we would fragment that kind of funding, it would be easier to have a transparent view on, is this project a scam right now or not? Or is it working, or is it like in a hibernation kind of state?
Yeah, also like that the funding can then follow more naturally like the life cycle of like if you have like something like a currently being blocked by something, another platform coming up. An issue I see with during this incremental funding, well, an issue that kind of come up with the incremental funding is like the periods where there is a lot of boring work where the deliverables aren't very exciting and then don't stimulate. So if you were to, in a normal ICO, you'd collect all the funding that you estimate, if you're doing this honestly, like what the entire thing will need. But the beginning with will often be like very boring and will not like have clear things where we can say, okay, this is becoming the actual promise. And then to get through those dry phases then, to instill the further excitement to continue extra funding, that could then become difficult. So if someone finds a compromise where you have like some set funding that still carries you beyond like the current intermediary goals, along those lines.
So I think if you apply that system of incremental like funding, one additional thing that you will get is like you said, a transparent view on like all the merits that a team has ever accomplished. And I also think even in stages where there's more like dull work, as you described it, even then there's like there will be this core of people, and I think that can be a core that evolves over time. So if someone sort of gets bored by the project and they leave, somebody else might pick up his task and also request for new funding, and they will get that funds allocated and they will be able to spend it and so forth. So I mean, you have, but the point that I was trying to make is that that team, so that current core team sort of, they will at every stage in that project, they will have some credibility, and they will probably sort of not dictate, but suggest like, okay, we know that this is like a dull task, but it needs to be done. So we are suggesting, we're like putting these issues to the front for people to fund it. So if there's someone who's interested in investing in that ICO or that DAICO, they will be able, so they will listen to that team and they will say, okay, if you want to fund and you want to acquire some of our tokens, this is the best way to do it. And we know it's a dull task, it's maybe not a very sexy task right now, but it will deliver some tokens for you, so your investment is done, and the project can proceed. So I think that's an important thing.
I think that staged ICOs and DAICOs are totally changing the dynamics, and it becomes way closer to the promise of community-owned and community-governed, because it requires an active community to continuously develop a community-driven project which is governed in the form of a DAI-ICO. We see projects like Claros, for example, which did staged ICOs. Claros, Clement, for example, is one of the people from them. And they see how it is harder, but they still get their funding. Because they need to continue their conversations with their community. They really need to build it. They need to justify their behavior, and they need to stay in touch with those communities. Sometimes you had ICOs where after the ICO there was like no communication anymore. The team was completely reshaped because the team you need for an ICO is a totally different team than what you need for executing the task, right? So I believe in the long run, if we speak about publicly owned infrastructure, community-owned public infrastructure, then state ICOs or bounty systems which deliver new features is the only way to sustain them and to operate them, in addition to network fees which are just there to maintain the platforms. right? So I think there is no way around that. I think there are a lot of open questions in regards of what are the details, what are the governance models, what does it really mean to do in the ICO? Is it just a DAO plus an ICO? Okay, DAOs, we can have thousands of flavors of that. I think what we really need to do is to define potential proof of concepts which go in that direction and to see more of those experimentations.
Just want to shift gears a little bit in our conversation. I think one other problem with ICOs is that it's actually always like Ether or any or something like a value being sent in to transform that into, let's say, a project kind of token. But what if we don't put in like Ether, but just like directly say like we're gonna validate the work people are doing, and then we'll just out of thin air from that work we will create like tokens. Any thoughts on that, Lion?
Just want to say I agree with all the points said today since I sit down. Just fucking build Ethcan already. Who's doing that? Raise your hands.
What, Ethcan?
Yeah. Just do that, man.
I'm trying to get funding for that. We should do an ICO to do our ICO tool.
Yeah, you should do a DAICO to build a DAICO.
Yeah, that's hard. It's like a C compiler for C.
Yep.
Yeah, we should as quickly as possible. We should build like the very first generation kind of DAICO tool, so we can do a DAICO to build a better DAICO thing. Eh?
I think you could use Aragon or DAO Stack for that, maybe. You know, because they have a nice framework, and they have the DAO framework, right? And they will develop further their governance structures and tools and functions. And I think it's very easy to apply that, right? Instead of just trying to rebuild it from scratch.
I'm just trying to build a little further on the narrative here. Is that I also think that if you look at people who are like engaged here in this whole blockchain community, what you see is that people often are occupied with different projects at the same time. So they're sort of spending time on different projects in the same time span. And I think there's also an opportunity there for people to actually be present and be part of, let's say, like a core team in different projects at the same time using that system. And then it's much easier to sort of roll into one engagement and roll out of another one without like necessarily stopping project, because like if you do an ICO, sort of that money is locked to you. You might have like a key on the multisig and you're sort of bound to that project forever until the money is, you're out of money or the project stops or whatever, or you exit scam it. But if you would do it like in a more continuous way, I think that would also enable like the natural way that a lot of these developers and people who are involved, they just navigate through these projects. And I think there's that might also be an opportunity to do it like that. I killed the conversation, did I?
I was thinking that Giveth is already kind of like a proto DAICO, it seems, because you have your projects, you have different goals, you claim expenses on, kind of.
Yeah, totally. That's why, like, so on to build Ethcan, it's currently a campaign on Giveth. I don't know how far that is. Griff, can you talk a little bit about like the Ethcan campaign on Giveth?
Sure. Yeah. So there is a awesome project manager named Matt, who's really pushing this forward with, of course, Flurkel and the Swarm City crew, and a lot of Giveth guys who have been trying to push this idea out there to create a UI for DAICOs, kind of hacking into another, like Trello. Like the original idea was Trelleth, right? Just add Ether to Trello cards, which I still think actually would be really cool to try, right? But we met some people that are doing an open source version of Trello called Wecken, and the main dev for that is really into it. So it seems like a nice place we can just hijack their UI and basically put Ether behind Trello cards. And as the cards get completed, tokens are created, and Ether is sent out to people who are doing the bounties. And so, but we need grants, we need money. I mean, unfortunately, these things don't just, create themselves. Matt has other things to do. Matt's part of the Swarm City crew too. And hey, they're building an application. They have a token. This stuff is important. But they really want, and I really want to see DAICOs have an easy way make it really easy for someone to do a DAICO instead of an ICO. Right now, it's just way too easy to do an ICO. But if we can raise some funds to build the seed platform, then maybe other people will be more excited about doing it once they've seen it done before. If the DAO would have worked out, then everyone would have been building DAOs. Yeah, it didn't. But if it would have, people would expect there would be a lot more accountability on ICOs because they'd have to compete with the DAO where every piece of ether, every little way was accountable. Here, not so much. And so the ICO model took off, and it's a lot easier to just do what has been battle tested and works. So we need to raise some funds to actually build something, a UI for DAICOs. And yeah, you can just go to giveth.io, beta.giveth.io/campaigns, find ethcan, there's a little donate button, and boom, you have your little, you can start building. Giveth itself is kind of a model of DAICO, where there's money there, it can only be spent on milestones that are there, and then when those milestones are accomplished, the money gets paid out. So that can bootstrap another ethcan, and then ethcan eventually would fund itself on its own platform, I hope.
Just want to add that you say it's too easy to make an ICO now, and probably that's the root of the problem, right? But that now there's not that many ICO either because people learn that. So now what people will do is will check exactly what's behind this project, right? And it just it's like a market mechanism. Like it may take a while, but now the project that has better fundamentals will the ones that will keep going in the long run. Yes, we lost a lot of money on the way, but what I'm saying is the market will eventually fix that.
Long enough? So I also, but that's maybe more like a marketing aspect. What I'm always wrestling with, if you talk about the term DAICO, is if the broader term ICO is not burned too much right now to actually still call it like that. So I would pledge if anybody could come up with a totally new name that doesn't have any connotation to ICOs whatsoever. I think that might also help the situation.
That was all I was going to say. The words, what it stands for is not correct. If you look at it, it's not initial. Voila. So the I should go.
Maybe continuous coin offering, or because it's not offering either, but maybe it'd be interesting actually to define this sustainable token model, maybe.
I think that opens up the question of how coins are generated and distributed. We have seen the token distribution model of Bitcoin, and then we have seen a shitload of ICOs. Is it that really? Can we not be more innovative of how we generate tokens?
But I think that will take some time because, right, as Griff mentioned earlier, there's no evidence supporting that this approach will work. But I'm pretty sure that if there are some initiatives that actually take it on like that people will actually see the value of it. I'm really a profound believer of that idea. But yeah, it's like a chicken and an egg situation. People don't know anything else. If you're talking about investing in crypto or like projects and tokens, than a traditional ICO. So yeah, and there's no evidence backing that up that there is actually a better model. But then again, only the benefits of that new model will start to be obvious once you have like that track record of reputation built, like just all the results and all these tasks that gets effectively implemented and all and are successful. So yeah, it's a difficult thing to start. So yeah, someone needs to try to bootstrap that, but also persist in like running such a project. So it might be something that sort of self-feeds, like building a platform itself might be such a thing. And adding to that, I also think that like if you would do it in a continuous way, also the like sort of the bar that you put is much lower to actually bootstrap a project with a continuous approach. It's really once you have like almost a vague idea or like maybe a tangible idea for like a first phase of that project, you can also already get started and try to get some initial interest from some people that actually want to put money in there. So it's much easier to start. So, and that's I think will also help because you can like everybody's here like sitting in the back of their minds with 10 ideas of projects, but just a lack of time to execute them. And I think one of the things that's holding people back is that it's a lot of preparation beforehand to actually shape that project, and yeah, you have to really rally for that project to get the attention and start to build some sort of a community around it. As we're now, yeah, it would be very easy to just like write some of these ideas, create some tasks. If people like it, they will pick it up. And that would also add to like your credibility in that system. Like if you have like some small projects that might have been some good initial ideas, but then they stopped. Yeah, that says something about the person himself or how he approached that. And yeah, then it really becomes visible. And I think yeah, of course, we have that public system like being the blockchain, so that can annotate all that progress. And yeah, there are a lot of systems already in place, like the example of Giveth or like Gitcoin. For example, they already annotate all that stuff on the blockchain. So if you just apply it there, you can refer to those tasks. And then everybody can see how much they got funded. Did they get funded? Were they executed? Were they paid out? And all. So you have that whole track record, all these building blocks sort of, they are already there. Yeah, so it's just a matter of starting it basically. So let's do it.
I was just going to mention a counterexample to the, not really continuous, but EOS had the year-long crowd sale, and during that time their token was tradable, and supposedly they were working during that time. EOS.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to hint to the epicenter talk with one of the guys from Block One, where they said that this is pure profit for Block One, and they did not promise to deliver the platform. Just saying.
I wanted to introduce. I don't know the time. What time? How much more time we have? Maybe another aspect is that when you do an ICO, you are sitting on a honeypot of capital, as long as nobody steals it, or you have like a parity problem. So yeah, I would like to address that as well. Like if you have like a more continuous thing, then the money that comes in is for a specific task, and hopefully you will not like stay with a big honeypot of yeah.
Yeah, just very succinct mention. Going back to the naming, I think Xavi just nailed it. He said continuous token offering, which just happened to be CTO.
I would like to back that up as well and to second that. I think there are a lot of psychological issues as well. So if people sit on a shitload of money and they haven't managed funds in their lives, it's very hard for them to manage those funds correctly. And we all have that ego weakness to believe that we earned what we get, which is strangely enough because that's the money of the people which put it in because of the vision you communicated, not because you're super nice. And so we have seen a lot of people which just that turned on their values, right, because of the money they got in the ICOs. And I hope that continuous coin offerings or continuous token offerings can avoid those and give the builders and the architects the opportunity to focus on the building and not on the money.
Relate to that as well, the psychological issues, like when you have money and that's outside ICOs, like you have less pressure, and pressure is good. Like the world we live, the startups are like pushing out, they compete among them because
Yeah. Okay. Yes. I think the point you're making is like it's good to have some kind of pressure on the project. Like, oh fuck, we really need to deliver because we're sitting on all this money. On the other hand, I truly believe that's. Are you okay? Then I totally agree.
We need to hustle because we need the money.
Yes. Yeah.
You could probably say that within like the Ethereum community itself, right? Like there's a lot of early people within Ethereum that now has a lot of money, and why should I work 10 hours a day if I can just work 4? That's just the way it is, right? And that's just something intrinsic for having the resources. So having pressure, it's bad. So pressure is a degree, right? Like it's like a lot of things, but not having pressure. And like economical pressure, I don't think it's good at all, right? You need pressure.
I would like to differentiate between like existential pressure and pressure in general. So I think it's totally unhealthy if you have existential pressure, which means that you have less funds that you know that you can sustain yourself. And this is a big problem for staged ICOs or projects which hand out money on the basis of, well, let's see what happens next week. Because this does not give any ability to plan for the developers which are involved, which are dependent on those funds, right? And I think it's also not really responsible to handle that way. So the question is, how can we ensure that there is basic funding for core teams which are working on it on the long run, and bonuses in the form of bounties and so on to incentivize additional deliveries, right?
Yeah, that's partially what I was going towards with saying, like, when we go through like a slump where there's also like boring work, where then you're like, oh, I have to do this like really rushed right now because it doesn't look like anything that is substantial. And the negative feedback loops with like knowing that you're like, you don't know what is going to come in like 3 weeks or so, and then you're not going to build, you're probably not going to invest the time that you need in the underlying architecture to make it something that is worth what your initial vision was about.
Maybe a good function to back that up is if you have payouts of bounties, you could have like a direct payout and a payout over time. So which would give like the ability to plan a little bit ahead. Because if you do a lot of work, you get a lot of payouts over time, which gives you a runway of 3 to 6 months, right?
I was related to what you were saying about this. It's kind of a peer pressure what you're talking about, right? You need to deliver something, and sometimes you just don't have a deliverable. That probably also comes from the way we sell the projects, right? Like if I'm selling, like I'm gonna do like this amazing thing, like this super cool project that decentralize everything, right? I need to deliver that, right? So probably a lot of times is also the problem of how we sell that, because we make it easy, we make it tasty, we make it sexy, and things are much harder, especially for when we're designing for long-term projects, which is what we're doing here, right? And that's probably where we have this conflict. We're designing for long-term, but we need to sustain, we need to break it down in small pieces so we can like track the progress and not like abuse about that, right? So finding this balance is I believe the key element maybe.
Yeah, that kind of is the same as what I was trying to say before, that when we look at people, they have difficulties in thinking very long term and investing very long term. So the same thing with now I'm saying it again, politicians that get elected for 4 years, they kind of always like talk about these things that can give them quick wins or anything. But the big projects that give something over like more than so many years, it's hard to get people rallied again behind it, and that's why I still doubt how it will work if you have a lot of people working on it, or like saying sponsor this or that. How is it going to be kind of communications, the one that has the loudest voice or the nicest face, or how is it going to work? And is there going to be competition that kills a project? Could be that or like a project diverges in different ways, that you kind of get like angry people or like fights between people in between the project, because there's no common pot of money, so there's no common reason to kind of align yourself. You know, it's like, okay, you're thinking this, I'm thinking that, I'm gonna be better at express my thoughts, and fighting is maybe even a good thing, because I will get the money and you won't. So there's no reason, like once you have one big pot of money, you have to be aligned. The people working for it, they have to kind of find consensus. I don't know how it's going to work out. We'll have to try it, like the way we always do things, right? Try, iterate on it, and make it better.
Yeah, that brings us to kind of governance, right? Griff. Yeah, now it's about governance, so I think you should join the conversation again. So Kiki's point was like, isn't it better to have like one big pot of value, and to just govern that, because people will be incentivized to get aligned around a common vision. So maybe it's a better thing to have like an ICO.
I mean, the real problem is access to the power of governance, right? And that's when you do that, you create a barrier of entry. And then it's not a community project, it's whoever those people are, you know. And so if someone starts an ICO and there's these multi-sigs, you know, the people who are on the multi-sig get to control it, then that's the gateway to access to the funds, and which is therefore the decision making. And we do need decentralized. I mean, we're not there yet. We don't have good decentralized governance solutions at all that are practiced and not even close to perfected. And we need a lot of experiments. But we're in dreamland right now. And in dreamland, I hope that there can be a reduction in the barrier to entry of making the decisions around these, what I would say, for the most part, are building infrastructures or community-based projects.
You don't agree?
Yeah, well, I didn't agree in the beginning, but then when you explained, I agreed a little bit more. No, I was thinking about like, if you have, but it's true. In the end, the people having the keys to a multisig are in charge. So you can have a big governance system with a lot of people participating based on whatever token supply they have, or whatever system you come up with. In the end, it's down to the people kind of turning the keys. So I agree that that's always a risk that you have with an ICO where you have a multisig. So if you kind of think away that issue, then you can have any governance system after ICO. But it's true, it comes down to if they say that the people holding the keys, we're going to do it, then it's not going to happen. But I still feel doubt about like having a lot of people trying to get to consensus, of having a lot of people trying to decide on something. I am very scared that we will go towards a system that we have right now with elections or with whatever system that kind of has to boil down to a few people doing the things, but a lot of people deciding, and then you get this whole, oh my God, it's a drag to go through that thing.
The biggest problem we have with that is that there are often not aligned values and shared stories. So I think where the debate needs to happen around creating new projects is always first, what are our core values? Because you can't like negotiate them later. Because if you negotiate them later, you will have a fork. Because you will figure out that one part of the community has different values than the other part of the community. So I'm fully down with you that we, first of all, don't really know how to crowdsource these values in bigger, communities. We don't know how to establish seed trust if we don't have a kind of trust distribution system in place already. And these are usually hierarchies, which is problematic itself. And that is the uncertainty we all share, I think. We don't really know how to do it. But I think what is also clear is if we don't find other structures, we are stuck in the hierarchy structures we know. And we know where they fail. And we know that they are not really giving us the flexibility and agility we need to move in that fast-moving space we are in. So if we want to really be able to react to the fast-changing environment we are in, we need to leverage the intelligence of all the different people in the community and giving them the opportunity to come together and to work different problems out. And for that, they need to have the ability to access funds, right? So it becomes the challenge of how do we legitimize decisions and how do we legitimize fund distributions in a way without hierarchies, which are natively prone to potentially power corruption, right? And I fully agree, we don't know how to do it. I think we really need to look into how can we move forward in that direction, how can we identify the projects which give us the leap to the next iteration, right?
I couldn't agree more with that. A project needs to fully define what their values are, because that's what allows you to take decisions that can make the long run. So, and I wanted to like bind that with what we're talking in the previous session, which is maybe these values can be something quantifiable already. Maybe don't have to feel fully quantifiable. And also maybe these values is something that we can modify. Maybe we can create a formula that express what these values are, and maybe we keep updating this formula over time, the way like we learn and we make it more and more precise, and we keep shaping what our values are, right?
I mean, kind of derailing the conversation back to DAICOs, or whatever we wanted to call them, CTOs, or if we don't have a shared pot of value and we have separate small pots of value for separate goals and whatnot, then do we really need a shared value, like shared values?
I think that is a very good question. And I want to take the question and combine it with what you said. If we find a way maybe to figure out what values we have and how we crowdsource them. Just to give you an example how difficult it is when I say democracy or freedom of speech, the same what you understand of democracy or freedom of speech. So that's a different, like, you have a different symbol in mind than I have a symbol in mind what it really means. So the problem with language is it's very heavily dependent on cultural background and socialization and like your current context you're in. So this means if we want to have an opportunity to really discuss the values we share or to surface them in a signaling way, we need to find a way to interact with them and to like build a relationship for us between those values and us. And that's the only way how it becomes fluid and how it becomes meaningful. It's a muscle we need to exercise, right? And when it comes down to what you said, can we not have shared values? Maybe we have small communities with their own values. I would say it's possible if we figure out the core values we have implemented on the global communication infrastructure and communication backbone, which allows us to survive as a species, to figure out the global problems we have on coordination. Because if we don't find those common value sets, the common denominator, the smallest denominator, I don't see how we can sustain, us as a society, or figure out ways how we create global consensus on the issues we need consensus on, right? And this is true for global communication backbones as well. But I hope that this is just a very small set of shared values we can agree on, and then we see all these different flavors of small communities on top, which have additional constraints on their values and directions and policies. Because shared values are in the end a common sense of which translate into some form of constitution, right? Which then legitimizes the policies you have on the platform.
So we have to bring this to a close. I want to do closing thoughts and just pass the mic around because we have like 5 minutes that we can still have this discussion. And I don't know, I like putting people on the spot, then they have space to speak. And after this is a DAppNode workshop. So stay around if you want to check out the latest version of DAppNode and connect to it yourself. But final thoughts on DAICOs. I'm gonna start because I have the mic. I think that this is a big experiment, and I'm hoping to see some fire lit under the ass of people that are raising money. And I would love it if we could find an organization that wanted to do a DAICO. And I feel like that's probably the way to push this forward, is just to find someone who wants to do it, has the incentive to do it, and then, maybe if we can build a community around helping that group do it for one thing, then we would learn a lot, and then we can push forward on another and another and another. But it starts with one. So
DAICOs are cool for some things. If you want to share values and stuff, maybe it's good to have a shared pool of value. Maybe you want to do both. Maybe hybrid models work. Thought?
I never liked ICOs, and DAICOs is some idea that I barely touch, because I just don't think that almost nothing needs a token, right? So an ICO assumes that there is a token in place. So I have plenty of projects, and if I think through how to monetize them, none of them make sense a token. Like I can figure it out a token totally, but I'm compromising the essence of the project, right? So I don't think I don't think the value of the governance is like towards DAICOs, but like towards like true governance models that focus on like adding value to the projects and sustaining the projects. My perspective, like the token model, for the most part, this part that makes sense. Like we should go away from it. Yeah.
I like your thoughts on that, and I would say maybe we are even able to move into crowdfunding again, and into distributed bounty systems and communities which then fund what they think is important for the public shared infrastructure they have, next to having the infrastructure with a token which is just there for paying for gas and ensuring that we don't have DDoS attacks, and then we have a way to exchange value, right? So I fully agree. I hope that we see more ways of token generations which come not outside of the realm of I print the money and I hold the key to the printing machine, because this is something we had seen so long already.
So the primary issue with like ICOs that DAICOs could possibly address is that in ICOs you don't have like the filter, like is this now a scam? Is this somebody actually trying to build something? And the second part is right. The second part is, of course, like the psychological interactions of whoever now gets the money and legitimately wants to build the thing, and then changes happen where they don't feel the pressure anymore. What I'd be interested in with like DAICOs, if we have them, is like if we are going to launch a DAICO, we don't have to oversell it as much as we do for. It is recorded. If we do have a DAICO and we know we don't have to collect all the funding right now, that means also our promises can be much more grounded in nature, because which then also means we can actually have a healthy working environment, because you're not working to like make some facsimile of this white unicorn that you started off with. You can actually build a real product, and you feel the pressures that you set by setting realistic goals, which you can now.
I am really looking forward to the governance models that will come from this, and I hope that we can avoid to make mistakes that are like in history, and that's the most exciting part for me.
I'm pretty much the same. I think the governance models are just adding something to ICOs. I don't really care whether they stick around or whether they don't stick around or whatever. So long as we solve the governance issues, the token issue and the ICO issue will resolve itself.
Yeah, I think going off that, human history has shown that we don't work well in large-scale communities, that these micro communities are where we thrive really well and come up with cooperative models that really work. So the communication lines between these communities will be really important in the way we govern them as a whole. So we'll see what we build out of for that.
Awesome. So this is the roundup then for this thing. There's one certainty: we cannot have DAICOs if we don't have DAppNode running. So, right?
Hey guys, so thank you guys so much for hanging out. We have the next presentation is on DAppNodes, and if you haven't seen DAppNode, it's fucking sick. So you really want to hang out for this. We do need to rearrange the chairs a little bit so that it's more of like a presentation style. Yeah, no, 3D, so like. Oh no! It's okay. I'll solve it. This needs to be so that you can tell that you're talking. I know it sucks because you can't really tell that there's volume, but I'm really hoping you can talk into the mic because there's a live stream. And then we'll be recorded, and then we can like use it and try to keep it next to. If you just have it touching your chin the whole time, it looks kind of funny, but it works. It works magic.
I'll try. I am not good with that things, but I want to try. So, Griff,
Oye, tenemos que desconectamos el hotspot, ¿no?
¿Quieres desconectarlo?
Es que si no va a ser un follón. Como ya ahora tengo que desconectarlo, traerlo aquí.
Y volver a conectarlo. Entonces nos enseñamos el hotspot. Igual lo podemos conectar después
Esto ahora mismo diremos, ahora vamos, luego vamos
a conectar el hotspot para que todo el mundo se pueda conectar.
Bueno, pero al acabar, porque si no va a ser...
Sí, igual sí. Lo hacemos acá, si quieres. Sí, está en la maleta. Y yo tengo enchufado este aquí, ¿eh?
Ah, vale.
La idea es cambiarlo. Lo que no sé es cómo encender este monitor. Griff?
Oh yeah, for sure.
How to... Okay. I need sound in the screen, is possible, or I need to use my laptop for that?
Let's test it.
Okay.
Do you have it? Okay, good.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, DAppNode! DAppNode!
Okay. It's my laptop.
¿Lo puedes pinchar con el ordenador?
¿Eh?
trust circles within communities. By sharing a single device with family and friends, you support a node that is part of a trusted network. By running your own secured hardware, you are able to contribute to and enjoy the benefits of a truly decentralized web.
Hello. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's fine. Well, this is hard, but it's okay. Okay.
I say the chin because there's feedback. You know, it's like, oh, I don't feel.
Yeah, it's.
I mean, it's silly, but it works.
No, it's fine. Yeah. Well, what? 2 minutes. Let's wait. Uno. No, esperamos a ver. Sí. Hi.
That's still going.
What happened? It's fine. Sí, lo único es que dice que hay que tenerlo pegado. Lo que pasa es que estoy un poco incómodo aquí porque es un poco. Sí, podemos hacerlo así y luego cambiamos, ¿no? Mola porque Jordi está allí y Alex y. This one, maybe?
Oh, you want that stick? No, it's okay. As long as,
Fine.
as long as this man knows.
Yeah, just watch out for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe we need to tell Jordi that we are going to start. I don't know. Ask him. Ah, vale. No sé si quiere venir o no. Tampoco, ya se lo sabe, ¿eh? He knows. Oh, oh. Ah, no. No, es simplemente que no me asuste. Okay.
Hey guys, so we're just about to start this awesome demo, an interactive demo. So be ready to sign on and hack into a Wi-Fi so you can actually participate in the decentralized web. And this is Edu who's going to present DAppNode. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Eduardo. I am the project lead of DAppNode. He's Abel. He's helping me to make a demo today. About the Wi-Fi thing, we are making it at the end of the session because right now we only have one Ethernet cable, so we need to switch. So that's at the end of the presentation. So first of all, let's start about talking about why is needed DAppNode and what is the problem that we have right now. A lot of people are started to using decentralized technologies, but they don't are aware that they are not access to the content in a decentralized way. So if we take the Vitalik Buterin Medium post, oh sorry, yep. We can define 3 kinds of decentralization: the logical, the architectural, and the political. And if we focus on the architectural decentralization, we need to resolve this question: how many physical computers is a system made up of, and how many of those computers can it tolerate break it down at the single time? But if we start to thinking more in deep about this question about the decentralization of the hardware, we need to resolve other questions like where are these physical computer nodes and how many people control these nodes. The thing here is a lot of people are developing amazing decentralized websites, but the truth is they are using services like Infura to access the content, or they are deploying these websites in services like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, or DigitalOcean. These are very cool tools for sure. Infura is making an amazing work for the community, but we need to understand that to achieve the full decentralization, we need to start to using our own hardware for that. I mean, it's a matter of achieve the full decentralization. If we use services like Amazon or Infura, they can censorship our amazing tools. They can know everything about us. They can track our accounts, and we are losing one of the most powerful things about decentralization. So for us, it has no sense to use these amazing tools in centralized services, because at the end we are losing all the power of all these new technologies. So for that is DAppNode. Sorry, this is DAppNode. DAppNode is an open source software that can be installed on any hardware, and it gives decentralized access to dApps. And today we are going to present our video, this official presentation of our presented video, and I'm going to show to make a little presentation of all the product. So let's.
DAppNode is open source software that can be installed on your own device to create a decentralized hardware layer, which allows anyone to run their own nodes, making it easy for every kind of user to achieve the full potential of decentralized technologies. When we stop using centralized platforms to access decentralized services, we create a censorship-resistant network that is maintained by users but controlled by no single entity. Now, without anyone but you controlling your device, your data and your privacy are finally secure. Our system of sharing access makes it easy to create trust circles within communities. By sharing a single device with family and friends, you support a node that is part of a trusted network. By running your own secured hardware, you are able to contribute to and enjoy the benefits of a truly decentralized web. Whether you're an average user or a developer that wants to smooth your work process, you can easily deploy DAppNode on your machine, which gives you access to all the services you need. And with a few clicks, you can deploy a secure and private version of your favorite dApps and nodes. DAppNode connects its users to a real P2P economy where they can receive incentives and rewards for sharing resources or maintaining nodes, thus encouraging mass adoption of decentralized technologies. By deploying a DAppNode within your community, you become a gateway to a decentralized re-evolution and a trusted resource for your friends and family. Join us by installing DAppNode and become a part of the truly decentralized web. Welcome to DAppNode. DAppNode is
So this is a very good brief of our project. DAppNode play the intention of DAppNode is play two big roles in the decentralization. In first place, we want to make easy for users to connect to decentralized services in a really decentralized way. To make easy for every kind of user to connect to the service provided by decentralized web, and at the same time provide an infrastructure for dApps that run in every home of the users. So for that we developed this software. This is an open source software that can be installed on every hardware. It's open source, and the idea is that when you install it at DAppNode, it's a regular installation. That is the demo that we are going to make today. And after that, you get some essential components installed on your computer, well, in your server. So, well, indeed, this is a good example of DAppNode. It's Intel NUC, And in this system, we are going to run a VPN, Ethereum full node, an IPFS node, and other tools that later we are going to explain. And yeah, mainly that is the idea of DAppNode. The idea is that create the decentralized hardware layer, which allow to start to using decentralized service in a really decentralized way. One of the advantage of that is, for example, the privacy. One of the big issues that we have right now is that the people are using services like Etherscan to check his accounts. But if you don't want to be tracked for anyone, you need to start to using your own node. And our intention is to make very easy for users to achieve that. Even our intention is that even my mom can install it, but we are a little far for that. But it's our intention. More than that, we want to develop a platform in which developers can create his own applications, make easy to other users install it. Indeed, we are running a setup of Docker modules, and at